All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for Tuesday, February 11th. As you know, we have a number of bills today, and we're in a little bit of a transitory period with our witnesses because of the incoming weather. We allowed virtual. There are still some people live, so it's going to be a little bit of a mix and match, so we'll see how it goes. But we'll start with House Bill 49, Delegate Stewart, Maryland Department of Labor, study on building code requirements for single staircase buildings.
I guess folks can come up. I think they're probably all virtual, though.
Great. If you have anybody here, bring them up, but we have a long list of virtual.
Yep. All right. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the single greatest body ever composed. I'm Delegate Von Stewart. This is House Bill 489. This is a nice study bill for you to kick off the day. A new idea is sweeping the nation. Its adherents are legion. You will hear from some of its biggest champions today, probably virtually. And that idea is to allow buildings that are 6 stories or less to be built with 1 staircase instead of 2 staircases. The argument for this is twofold. One is that single-story buildings are better for residents' quality of life. You'll hear more about this later, but the structure of double staircase buildings means that apartments are almost always built such that you have 2 other units on each side of you, a window on one side, and a hallway on the other. You can use more interesting construction if you only have to build 1 larger stairway or 1 stairway instead of 2 that allows, for example, a lot of units to be built where they are surrounded by windows on multiple sides, which is better for ventilation, it's better to have sunlight, and it's especially better for family units because families of 2 or 3 bedrooms can now have light in both of the kids' bedrooms rather than only 1. The other reason to do a single stairway bill, the reason that I think 17 states are considering this, you'll hear later that Baltimore City is already considering this idea, is that it's cheaper. It's just more affordable to build buildings with only 1 staircase instead of 2, and so the rent prices in buildings with 1 staircase instead of 2 are going to be lower, which is good for housing affordability. Now, why would we not do this? Fires, right? Obviously. The reason that in most municipalities over the course of history, or the course of the United States history, have required 2 staircases instead of 1 is because you're worried about fire safety. Now, Europe never did this. If you go to Europe, almost every building is built with 1 staircase, and there's no evidence that fire safety is any worse over there. In fact, it's actually better. Fires per capita and the severity of fires is actually better in European cities than it is in the United States. That said, we're still worried about fires. So that's why the bill in front of you is a study, and only a study. We want a neutral third party that contracts with the Department of Labor to look at this issue from all sides to see, is this actually a way that we can make tenants' lives a little bit cheerier and literally sunnier and lower their rent prices without endangering either our firefighters or our tenants. And so I want to be super crystal clear. I don't want to make any changes to the building code if it's going to put tenants or firefighters at risk. I'm not interested in doing that. That's why it's a study. We've required the Department of Labor to consult with the IAFF, the firefighters union, which is why they're neutral on the bill. They're happy that they're involved in the study. We'll require them to, meet with the fire marshal or whoever they need to make sure they get the study right. I don't know how the study's going to come out, but it's going to issue recommendations for us about whether we should do this. I'll make one other note, which is that based on the amendment from Preservation Maryland, which I thought was very clever, I'm going to have a sponsor amendment for you guys to add fire suppression to the study. So the study will be both about single stairway buildings, but also fire suppression techniques, including sprinklers in older buildings. Now, everyone who was on the committee last year will remember the Melanie Diaz law that Delegate Charkoudian championed, and this committee did a lot of work on. I've talked to Delegate Charkoudian this week about this. There's currently a work group that's engaging in some work on this, and she thinks there may be an opportunity to incorporate some of what the work group's already worked on into this study. What I will say is we can't make the study too expensive because we have a structural deficit. So you're going to hear later from folks that want to be added to the study. I'm open to that, but we need to make sure that we're not too ambitious with how much the study can do because we don't want the fiscal note to balloon so much that appropriations doesn't allow us to pass the bill. So in conclusion, you're going to hear more from people, probably some people that are worried about fires. You're going to hear from more people today tell you about why these single stairway buildings are the way of the future and they're so awesome. I truly don't know what the answer is. I can see the pros and cons very clearly, but I do think that this is something that the Department of Labor and their contractor should study, because I think that there are some steps potentially this committee could take to be both pro-housing and pro-fire suppression. And with that, I will urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate Stewart. Let's see, we have some questions. Start with Delegate Terrassa.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. One, I think, is probably a dumb question, but why Department of Labor?
They handle building codes. It does sound a little weird, I agree, but they do the building codes already.
Okay, and then the other one is, will they be looking at, I didn't see it in the bill, but I did just take a quick look, number of units? Because, I mean, I think one stairwell, for me, in my mind, is different if it's, you know, if you have 4 units on either side, that's one thing. If you have a lot more, that concerns me a lot more.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's implicit in the mission of the study, because it says to look at other jurisdictions, both within the United States and outside the United States, for best practices. And I know there are like square footage limits that other places do. So I do think it's sort of inherent in their charge. But if we need to change the language so it's more clear, I'm cool with that. But you're absolutely right. Like, 2 staircases in a building with a relatively small footprint, because it's just for, like, I don't know, homeless veterans, is one thing, but a massive, like, multi-block super building that's maybe 5 stories but massive, and it's going to take you 3 years to walk to the other side of the building, is different. So I'm with you.
Great, thanks.
Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegates, I noticed, and you briefly touched on this about the fiscal note, and I know it's like 106,000, there's 2 positions and all that. If you talk to them about whether that's a real number or whether it has to be 2 positions to do this study.
I have not had a chance to talk to the Labor Department yet. I will note that the Labor Secretary is my former boss, so I'm hoping that she will give me a little bit of latitude here. Maybe we can only have 1 position instead of 2. I am going to try to negotiate with them, and I wanted to piece together with my fire suppression amendments and also the amendments you're going to hear about, asking them to consult with a bunch of different people. We've got to balance this, right? Because we want the study to be good, and we want a lot of different viewpoints to be recognized, and we want a lot of different topics to be recognized. But at the same time, we don't have unlimited funds. And so I have not had that conversation yet, but that's definitely a conversation I'm going to have.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on this bill for the sponsor? Okay, we have some virtual witnesses. Let's bring up Councilman Dorsey from the City of Baltimore.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'd like to turn my video on. I can't turn it on. But thank you for having me. There we go. Great. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having me, allowing me to testify. I'm Ryan Dorsey, City Council in Baltimore. I'm really thankful to have this bill studied, to study this issue. It's one that I've had on my mind to kind of do something about in Baltimore for a couple of years and have put a lot of effort into in the last 6 months or so. I will be introducing a bill to amend Baltimore's International Building Code later this year, around the time that I think session will be ending. Let me tell you how utterly reasonable I think single stair reform is. We already allow exactly what is essentially the basic proposal here in the international existing building code. That is to say that in a brand new building today, you can't have more than 3 stories of height without 2 staircases. But in a building that's 100 years old, that's constructed in the same way as you would construct a new building today, you can already have a single staircase serve up to 4, 5, or 6 stories under the international existing building code. And so what we're going to be doing in Baltimore is a bill that essentially makes the international building code for new construction mirror what already exists, what can be done and is being done already in Baltimore City and elsewhere under the international existing building code. Just a couple of months ago on Howard Street, in a historic building that was vacant for many years, we had a single stair, 6-story building able to be renovated and reopened and put back into use, creating a bunch of new dwelling units and commercial space because it was allowable under the international existing building code. There was a question about, I heard a moment ago about number of dwellings allowed and a limitation on that. And these things are factored into the international existing building code and what I will propose in Baltimore City. And so, we're already doing this in Baltimore City. We're going to be making progress. I'm fairly confident because we've done a lot of work with the mayor's office, who's fully on board with this. As well as our fire department and housing department. We've got a lot of buy-in on this. I'm fairly confident we're actually going to have this passed as a modification to our building code in the city before the end of this year. And I think it's worth noting that that this has been in place in Seattle for more than 40 years, 50 years at this point. And if you want a good primer on this subject, anybody who's new to this, I would say Google why North America can't build nice apartments. You will get everything you need to know there about a basic overview of the subject. Thank you,
Great.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. We'll turn to Dan Reed, Greater Washington.
Hi, good afternoon. Hi, my name is Dan Reed. I'm the Regional Maryland Policy Director for Greater Washington. We're a nonprofit that works towards more sustainable and equitable housing, land use, and transportation policies. And we strongly support House Bill 489. As has been explained, this bill is really simple. It would direct the Department of Labor to identify ways that Maryland could legalize single-stair residential buildings up to 6 stories and make recommendations by the end of the year. I think the real issue around this is that it's hard to build new homes right now in the state of Maryland. And when we aren't building new homes, that means fewer homes that adhere to modern fire safety requirements. 2/3 of homes in Maryland were built before 1990, which is when the state began requiring sprinklers in new homes. In Baltimore City, the median home was built in 1948. That's the 3rd oldest of a city in the nation. People cannot access homes with even basic things like sprinklers when we don't have them available. And as Delegate Stewart correctly noted, there are worse fire safety outcomes here in the U.S. than there are in many countries in Europe where they only have one stair. And jurisdictions in the U.S. that do allow single-stair buildings also require additional fire protection measures. Virginia passed a very similar bill last year that highlighted several of those interventions, like early smoke detection, mechanical smoke ventilation systems, and limiting the number of units per floor. This issue is personal for me. I grew up in a 900-unit, 1960s-era high-rise apartment complex in Montgomery County without sprinklers, and grew up with fires being a regular occurrence. You may have heard about this building because 2 years ago this month there was a catastrophic fire that displaced hundreds of people and took the life of a young woman named Melanie Diaz who was trying to flee the building. The fire marshal's report found that it was a single sprinkler head that could have prevented this tragedy. Maryland needs more homes, and Marylanders deserve to have access to homes with modern fire safety protections, and this bill will help us figure out how to get there. So we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Smith, Center for Building in North America.
Hello, my name is Stephen Smith, Executive Director of the Center for Building in North America. I founded this organization to build on zoning reform that's happening all around the country. Zoning rules around issues like parking, density have been the focus of a lot of housing advocacy over the past decade or so, and for good reason. But I've heard from a lot of architects, developers, and residents that even after reforming zoning rules, there's still other code-related challenges. So you can change rules to allow taller buildings on commercial streets, even small apartment buildings in single-family neighborhoods, but our building codes are not written with this type of small-scale infill development in mind. Construction costs are high, buildings are filled with studios and one-bedroom apartments that aren't workable for families, and big new apartment buildings tend to fit poorly into the fabric of single-family and low-rise neighborhoods. Building codes and standards are complex documents, but the height limit for single-stair apartment buildings stands out as a major and relatively simple issue. For a small building with 2 to 4 apartments per floor, the requirement to add a second stair if the building rises to 4, 5, 6 stories adds about 10% of the cost of construction. In an industry where small shifts in interest rates can kill the viability of projects, 10% is a huge amount of money. Land use and zoning reform is desperately needed, but it can only affect the price of land, which is maybe 30% of the total cost of development, and the remainder is in hard and soft costs, which is the things that single-stair reform can keep down. Currently, the model building code that Maryland adopts limits heights to just 3 stories. These rules were developed at a time when huge swaths of American cities burned routinely, and we had a few other tools to address the problem of fire. Over the years, technology has changed, but codes have not. The US now has one of the lowest single stair height limits in the developed world. Only Canada and a few African countries are lower. Places like Germany, South Korea, and Italy routinely allow skyscrapers of 20 stories or more with a single stair, with good fire safety outcomes, better than America's. More conservative places like Australia or the UK limit single stair buildings to 6 or 8 stories. The US remains at 3, but there's also a lot of jurisdictions within the US, New York City, Seattle, that allow up to 6. So anyway, I support the bill. I think it's a good move. Maryland won't be the first or even the 10th. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just what we want to hear, not the first or the 10th. Julian Frost. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Julian Frost. I'm a native of Baltimore City, where I work as a sustainability and green building consultant during the day and as a housing advocate in my free time. I am testifying in favor of House Bill 489 because it addresses an obsolete detail in our building code that I've been working tirelessly to change ever since I learned about it 2 years ago. I'm delivering my testimony from the 8th floor of a single-stair apartment building in Mount Vernon, Baltimore City, built in 1908 before the double egress rule became standard across the country. My building is extremely thin, and my unit takes up a whole slice of it, so we have windows on 3 sides. It's so nice to be able to naturally ventilate the space and have views and sunlight on multiple sides, and I want more people to have access to this. Infill development is key to growing the population of our urban centers, strengthening tax revenue, and stimulating foot traffic. But actually doing infill is incredibly difficult, in large part because of the double egress rule. Imagine a small infill lot in, say, Baltimore City, Silver Spring, or Frederick. A developer could fit a 3-story single-stair building on it, but that would almost never pencil out. It would be a waste of time to put all that effort into developing a building and then stop at 3 stories. But if a developer wants to build 4 or 5 or 6 stories on that small infill lot, it becomes impossible because all of a sudden you need to fit 2 stairwells and a hallway, leaving very little room for leasable space. House Bill 489 would transform countless small infill lots into immediate opportunities for infill development. The passage of this bill would jolt developers and owners of underutilized land into action. This bill puts into motion a formal, data-driven, expert-led process to safely legalize taller single-stair buildings. If this bill doesn't pass, the opportunity cost for the state would be massive. Let's not fall behind Virginia, New York, Minnesota, and all of the other forward-looking states that have taken action to align their building codes with international best practices. House Bill 489 addresses a tiny detail that has massive impacts on housing affordability, urban fabric, street life, municipal finance, and so much more. Please,
Great,
for the sake
thank you so much.
Okay,
we'll
thanks.
turn to Joshua Spokes, People-Oriented Places. Is Joshua Spokes here? Please go ahead, sir.
Is it me? Oh. Oh my God.
Mr. Spokes, are you going to present testimony?
Yes.
Great,
Good
go
afternoon. My name is Joshua Spokes. I'm speaking on behalf of Baltimoreans People-Oriented Places, which represents over 100 residents in Baltimore. We are speaking in favor of HB 0489, which represents an opportunity for the Maryland General Assembly to begin the process of implementing a building code reform that would address our state's struggles with housing affordability, livability, and economic growth. I've detailed the ways in which single-stair reform would address each of those aspects in our written testimony, and I'd encourage the committee to take a look into that. For my remarks today, I'm going to focus on my personal experiences living in single-stair buildings. After graduating from the University of Maryland, I was an English assistant in Spain for 3 years, where single-stair buildings are currently legal up to 28 meters or 10 stories. This type of housing is the building block of most cities and even many small towns in that country, and thanks to that, I was easily able to find affordable housing in each city where I taught. Even though the buildings were older, my apartments were all airy, open, and light, in contrast with the tiny atomized units that our state's existing building code allows. My first apartment was in a block of 4 attached single-stair buildings, which is a common configuration that allows for efficient utilization of bigger lots while maintaining open space. The unit ran the full width of the building, giving plenty of natural cross-ventilation and allowing my roommate and I to barely use our air conditioning even as things got hot in the summer. And I think many Marylanders would appreciate that option, given rising utility costs. After that, I lived in a unit that was only 1,000 square feet, but Its efficiency allowed it to be a 3-bedroom corner unit, and that it housed a family before my roommates and I lived there. The single stair configuration that this bill moves forward makes it much easier to build units that can accommodate multiple bedrooms and therefore give families more housing options where they are currently limited. This is another aspect I believe many Marylanders would appreciate. Thank you for your time today, and I hope that you will vote to advance this bill.
Thank you very much. We also, I believe, an in-person favorable witness, Robert Phillips, Maryland State Firefighters Association. Are you here? Okay, any questions for the favorable witnesses? Okay, we're going to turn, we have an informational only virtual witness, Seva Radnowski from the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Thank you. Turning on the video. If someone can turn it back on. Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Seva Radnowski, and I'm a research manager with the Pew Charitable Trusts in our Housing Policy Initiative. Pew has extensively researched the costs, benefits, and safety of single stairway buildings, and I'm going to share key findings from this research, which is forthcoming. Compared to large apartment buildings that require 2 staircases, single stairway buildings have multiple benefits, as you've heard today. First, they're easier to develop on smaller pieces of land or on infill lots, an important consideration for Maryland cities and suburbs. Second, these buildings fit well into existing neighborhoods and can help revitalize historic main streets. Third, they also cost less to build. And finally, units can be larger, designed with families in mind, including better ventilation and more natural light. Yet, single stairway apartment buildings aren't allowed in most U.S. cities, as the delegate said, because there has never been up-to-date information on their fire safety. This is the gap that our new research fills. 3 U.S. cities currently allow modern 4 to 6 story single stairway buildings: New York City, Seattle, and Honolulu. Pew found that overall fire death rates in single story buildings were indistinguishable from those in other multifamily buildings. For example, in New York City, which has over 4,000 modern single stairway buildings, the overall rate of fire deaths since 2012 was the same as in other residential buildings. We deeply investigated every fire-related death in New York City and Seattle's modern single stairway buildings from 2012 to 2024, and none of these were related to the lack of a second stairway. They all occurred in the unit. The evidence from outside the U.S. tells a similar story. In the Netherlands, for example, where single stairway construction is common, the fire death rate in those buildings is on par with rates in other types of residential buildings. More generally, apartment buildings have lower fire deaths than 1 or 2 family buildings, and modern multifamily housing built after 2000 has the best fire safety record of any housing type. That's true in states as different as Virginia, Montana, Delaware, Hawaii, or Utah. And finally, these are sprinklered buildings, and sprinklered multifamily buildings are the safest. Thank you again for hosting this hearing today. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Okay, I do not see any, so thank you. That concludes the bill on House Bill 489. Is anyone here for House Bill 606 for Delegate Taylor? Okay, then we will go to House Bill 372, Prince George's delegation, Prince George's Gateway Development Authority, sunset repeal, and we have Delegate Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the time taking here to consider House Bill 372. This is a very straightforward piece of legislation. The senator and I and other members of our delegation have been working on and passed legislation to create the Prince George's Gateway Development Authority. It did have a sunset provision within it, setting to expire in 2028. This legislation simply repeals it. The Development Authority has brought so many communities together around a discussion of, what do we want this region to look like, and how can we get funding, so on and so forth, for business facade redevelopments, things like that. We haven't had a huge amount of money. Currently, there's $500,000 that was allocated 2 years ago, and very small expenses have been made from it. But this legislation simply repeals the sunset, and we're asking for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for the sponsor? Okay, we had signed up in person Mayor Benitez from the city of Mount Rainier and Jean-Tel Green for Prince George's County Municipal Association. I'm not sure if either of them are here.
I don't see them.
Does not look like it. Okay, then that concludes a very efficient bill hearing on House Bill 372. We will now turn to House Bill 606, Delegate Taylor, real property. new home sales, entry of final sale price in multiple listing service.
Simply repeals the sunset, and we're asking for a favor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I proceed? Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Kim Taylor, representing Prince George's County's District 23. As you know, the Maryland's Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity finished its work last fall and has several recommendations that seek to address the persistent misvaluation or undervaluation of properties owned by Black Marylanders. One of those recommendations is reflected in House Bill 606. You'll hear more about the details of the bill from others. What I want to share with you is a common scenario that plays out across the state. So let's say I live in a nice single-family home development that was built about 10 to 15 years ago. Within a mile of my community, a brand new single-family development is built with homes comparable in size and amenities, but they sell for a couple $100,000 more than my purchase price 10 years ago. I'm nearing retirement and I need to sell my home to downsize or to refinance to pay for long-term care. Either way, an appraisal has to be done and my home is barely valued more than what I paid for it, or even worse, it's valued lower than what I paid. Why? Not exactly sure. But what I do know is new homes recently sold in that new development less than a mile from me were never input in the multiple listing service and therefore were not used as comparables. Why? I don't know why. I don't know the history behind that why, but what I do know is that the Maryland's Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity took a year to study this issue. And one of their recommendations is that developers, builders, brokers, or real estate agents should be required to report final sales prices into a multiple listing service or other public database within 30 days after the sale of a new home. I am aware of the opposition who claim, among other things, that SDAT is an option to a multiple listing service. I can assure you that it is not. SDAT is not a reliable repository of sales data, nor does it have a mechanism for searching for recent property sales. House Bill 606 is one of the Black Caucus housing priorities and seeks to increase transparency, market accuracy, and equity. Please vote favorable for this task force recommendation that will make an immediate difference in our communities. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Boyce and members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. I am Cleveland Horton, Executive Director of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, and I'm here today to urge your support for House Bill 606. This is more than just a bill. It is a necessary step toward dismantling a long-standing barrier to fair and equitable housing. It is a call to action to confront and correct the systemic appraisal bias that has disproportionately affected communities of color, first-time home buyers, and historically marginalized groups. For far too long, the housing market has operated in a way that allows bias, both implicit and explicit, to devalue homes, diminish generational wealth, and to deny families economic opportunities they rightfully deserve. Appraisals, which should be objective assessments of value, have been tainted by historical discrimination, redlining legacies, and unequal access to critical data. House Bill 606 seeks to bring transparency to the process by requiring that final sale price of new homes be entered into the multiple listing service. This seemingly simple change carries profound implications. It ensures that appraisers, buyers, and sellers have access to accurate, market-driven data, reducing their potential for subjective or discriminatory undervaluations. This bill is about fairness. It is about ensuring that no homeowner sees their property devalued simply because of their race, the neighborhood they live in, or the historical inequities that have plagued our housing system. It is about ensuring that families, particularly those in Black, brown, and immigrant communities, are not systemically stripped of their ability to build and pass down wealth. House Bill 606 is not just a housing bill, it is a civil rights bill. It is a commitment to fairness, equity, and the fundamental belief that every Marylander should have an equal opportunity to build a future unshackled by bias. I urge you to pass this legislation and take a stand for justice in housing. For these reasons, the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights urges a favorable vote, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. We'll take the virtual witness and then have questions for this panel. Jacqueline Priestley, my apologies. You may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Priestley. I'm a Prince George's County resident and co-founder of the FAIR and Unbiased Appraisal Advocates. I also recently chaired the State Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity. I'm here today to express my support for HB 606. In 2021, as the construction of my family's home was nearly complete, my husband and I prepared to move from a construction loan to a 30-year term loan. And during that process, we received appraisals that we felt did not accurately reflect the fair market value of our home. At the same time, several of our neighbors and other families in nearby communities faced similar challenges. Some were in the process of converting their construction loans to permanent loans as well. Others had their homes listed for sale for years. And while there were buyers ready and able to pay the asking price, appraisals would come in well below. Additionally, this reality negatively impacted homeowners who planned to use their homes for business collateral, as well as those who wanted to refinance for better interest rates. So to help rectify this issue, my husband and I had our home listed on the MLS after we closed on the purchase so that it could reflect our actual build cost. In listing our build cost, the families I mentioned ordered new appraisals, used our transaction as a comp, and secured new appraisals that reported their homes at higher value. In short, this approach works. Additionally, as part of my work with the task force, we examined the approach and impact of adding the final sale price of a new home into an MLS or similarly accessible databases. As noted in our report, the task force believes that timely reporting of new construction sales will increase transparency in sales prices and help provide sufficient comps in neighborhoods that would otherwise have insufficient sales data to determine an appropriate opinion of value. Opponents of HB 606 state the MLS should not be used and that instead the SDAT data is an existing alternative. However, on February 20th, 2024, during a task force monthly public meeting, then SDAT Director Michael Hicks stated, with SDAT, the law is very clear that the only thing that SDAT's data can be used for— Ms.
Priestley, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your testimony. I'm sorry, your time is up. Does anyone have questions for Mrs. Priestley or any of the panel? Okay, let me go with Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Priestley, I'm interested in your conversation about your discussion with SDAT. Can you explain to us what your experience was with that SDAT process?
Yes, Delegate Holmes. In our work as part of the task force to identify available data sources, the SDAT was referenced as one possibility. It was explored and researched. However, it was deemed not to be an appropriate option. In fact, during our public monthly meeting in February of 2024, the then SDAT director, Mr. Michael Hicks, stated, and this is directly from him, with SDAT, the law is very clear that the only thing that SDAT's data can be used for is the issuance of tax bills. Nobody is allowed legally to rely on them to issue any appraisals or for any other purpose.
Thank you, Ms. Priestley. I just wanted to make sure that we got that out there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Taylor, for the bill, and thanks to your panel. It's a great idea, and if I'm not mistaken, this is a Black Caucus priority. Is that correct? I was looking at the witness testimony, and there's a favorable with amendment from Maryland Realtors.
That's right.
And I was wondering if you'd had a chance to learn about that amendment from the Maryland Realtors.
Yes, that's the amendment that they're concerned. They're concerned because realtors, according to her testimony, written testimony, realtors subscribe to the MLS and they benefit somehow and receive a dividend from the MLS, and are concerned if we require builders or realtors to use the MLS, then they will benefit financially in some way.
So there's an incentive, a sort of baked-in incentive for them
That
to use
is true.
and you're
Now,
concerned.
but I've talked to several realtors since I heard that, because I'd never heard anything about a dividend being given by MLS. And none of them are aware of this particular dividend. So just not sure.
Okay. And I thank you for that clarification. I just wondered if they had an amendment, if you'd be open to considering it, but now that you've explained it that way, it sounds like we might need a little more clarification on how MLIS really works. They also suggested that the General Assembly find another way to capture sales, home sales data. Is that an idea that you'd considered, and what alternatives come to mind for you?
Yeah, that means building from the ground up a system that would capture sales data, all types of sales data, not just new home sales data. Why do that? When you've had a very competent task force take a year to do this work, and there's already an existing system that can be used just like that. I mean, we can change this dynamic in an instant if builders, realtors, brokers, and real estate agents would just report the new home sales. It's very simple.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Taylor, for this bill. In your research, have you figured out why this isn't done? It seems so commonsensical. You have a theory?
Transparency is my theory. So if I am a developer, large developer with 900, let's say, townhouses, and first of all, that first townhouse somehow goes into MLS, and I buy one at $600,000. The next person comes in, and maybe it's the downturn in the economy, and they just need to move some units. That one might be sold at $520,000. If that's never reported, the third person that comes in when times are better and is offered only at $600,000 again, then they never know that other one was sold. They have no negotiating power. They have no knowledge of really what the sales history has been in that particular development. Again, this is, you said hypothetical. What is my theory? I have not talked to a developer about that particular scenario.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we will move to the favorable. I'm sorry, Delegate Haley, yes.
I was a little bit late. The time frame that is 30 days, is that what you said?
Yes.
Is what's happening now, is it never gets reported?
That's a great question. Thank you, Delegate Healy, because we haven't said that it never happens, because sometimes it does. For instance, in the Priestley family's case, they engaged a realtor to input their own sales price or cost of bill, because it was a brand new home, into the MLS to create comps for others in their neighborhood. and nearby neighborhoods. I understand there's a development in Bowie that the developer or the builder is actually putting in the sales prices for that one. So it happens, so that means it can happen. There is precedence for it. So still kind of perplexed as to why.
It's not like it's taking too long. Sometimes it never happens at all. Is that what?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. It's not just that it doesn't happen soon enough. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all that it gets listed.
Most often it doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I don't want to miss anybody. Thank you so much, Delegate. We're going to bring up favorable with amendments, Lisa May from the Maryland Realtors.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Lisa May with Maryland Realtors here on this bill. It's a difficult one for us because we fully supported the task force and its work to make property valuations more fair. But to get to Delegate Lewis's questions, we didn't think it was fair to come before this committee without discussing the MLS and what we believe might be a conflict of interest in asking you to support this bill. So our multiple listing service is called Bright. It serves all of Maryland in addition to parts of other states. And it is a for-profit entity. Our local boards and associations, the ones that are out in all of your communities, they are shareholders of Bright. And they receive dividend payments. They receive other sources of funds based upon the revenue that Bright generates and based upon the number of subscribers that it has. So just to be very clear, under this bill, builders would be required to subscribe to Bright in order to input this information, and realtor organizations would benefit financially from that. We wanted all of you to be very aware of that as you're considering this bill, and if that gives anyone heartburn, if the committee wants to go a different direction, we would be more than happy to work with all of you, to work with all of the stakeholders to come up with another solution where there isn't that profit margin in place. I believe the bill calls it a similarly accessible database option. We are certainly happy to work with that because we do see the value of having this information on new homes as comparables for communities that have been historically undervalued. So with that, I will stop and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mrs. May. Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. My question is relevant to the realtors receiving profits from the multiple listing service. Two questions, Madam Chair, if I may. Number one, how does that work? And number two, if this bill goes through, then there would be additional profits to the realtors. So why would they object to that?
No, certainly. So the dividends don't go to individual realtor subscribers, but the MLS was formed by realtor associations. So it is that association, Delegate Holmes, in your instance, the Prince George's County Association of Realtors, they're a shareholder. And so as the MLS receives profits or has profits every year, they divest those profits out to all of the local associations who are shareholders in that organization.
So why would they object to receiving more funds?
We don't object to it, but we didn't want to come before you and say, please vote for this bill and not tell you that there is a financial concept of this for realtor associations.
I really appreciate that. Now, there's also been some discussion about another, if I may, Madam Chair, yes. Another entity taking the place of multiple listing. Any suggestions?
We have both our local clerks of the court, when properties are recorded in land records, both there and at the state, transfer taxes, recordation taxes at the local level, sometimes local transfer taxes, all of those are charged based upon the consideration or essentially the sales price of that property. So there is some sort of collection based upon the sales price of the property. I'm not saying that it wouldn't come with some sort of cost or fiscal note, which you all are very, very in tune to this session. But if there was something that we could come up with that doesn't require one industry to essentially require one industry to fund the private industry of another, we would be happy to explore that.
One final one. But the search on the multiple listing service would be so much easier, wouldn't it?
It would, but in order to enter information into the multiple listing service, you have to be a subscriber. Non-members don't have access to enter that information in.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, how big is this pot of money that's being spread around?
Well, as I mentioned, Bright MLS covers Maryland, Virginia, DC, parts of West Virginia, Delaware, parts of Pennsylvania, parts of New Jersey. So every realtor who sells homes within that large MLS it's a very large MLS. So they all pay annual subscription fees, several $100s a year. So that can be a very large part of money.
So every realtor pays a fee to be an entrant into MLS.
Yes.
And then when all the data goes back, there's still a pot of money that gets distributed back, not necessarily to the individual realtors, but we'll say Century 21, Long and Foster, whoever. I mean, I don't know.
To clarify, so it actually isn't the brokerages, it's the Realtor Association. So Delegate, in yours, Southern Maryland Association of Realtors would be the entity that gets that money.
SMRA gets the cut at the end of the day of a certain percentage of 6 different states' realtors' contributions, or is it only the contribution that all the realtors make with an SMRA into that pool?
Yeah, it is proportioned out based upon membership subscription within that association.
So it's a decent chunk of change.
I don't know exactly what they are, but it is, I mean, given that some of their budgets are not large, it's not nothing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that you've confessed, do you have any objections?
No.
Thank you.
Delegate Healy.
That's very good information, and I'll make this really, really quick. I mean, there's I don't even know what it is, but there's something called Zillow out there that also lists things. Mm-hmm. Is that like similar, or is that something totally different?
So Zillow operates an algorithm, essentially. Okay. Now, I'm sure that they base it upon publicly available information, but if you do go down and read the fine print of Zillow, it says it may vary by as much as 10 or 20% above or below. So it's not it's not an appraisal, it's not an assessment.
Got it. It's not necessarily very reliable. So the other, when money changes hands like this, is this a nonprofit, this system that you have, or is it, what is its tax status? Do they pay income tax on
Yes.
on this?
It is for profit. It is not a 501c3 or C6.
Okay, so it's taxable,
Mm-hmm.
so that's good to know. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. May, I just want to clarify. So you testified from the organization as favorable with amendments
Mm-hmm.
to essentially I don't know the word I'm trying to use here, to put on record that you would rather than, but why not rather just a letter of information because you disclosed, that's what I want to say. You did favorable with amendments so that you can disclose this organization and potential incentives versus giving a letter of information.
Yes, and that was a discussion that we did have. We overall support the task force, and we support having this information available in some format. So I think that was what tipped us over into support with amendments as opposed to just informational, we don't have any opinion whatsoever.
Right. And then to the point made earlier, there is no other system other than the MLS or SDAT, which we know potentially is not desired. But so MLS is essentially really the only option, either though folks have to pay into it and then submit information.
I would say yes. How easily SDAT or some other government site could be adapted to receive this information, it could be explored.
But you also have the readily available information in MLS, as Delegate Holmes mentioned.
Yes, primarily right now that is used for property resales.
Sure.
Not necessarily for all new construction.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other questions? Delegate Healy would like another bite at the apple.
Sure. Thank you very much. I just want to know if you have any idea how much money that is involved, if all of these get reported within 30 days of sale, as the bill requires. Do you know how much money that is in a year?
I do not.
Okay. Does anybody, can you get that information for us?
Yes.
Would you please?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. May. At this time, we'll call up our last unfavorable, Lori Graff from the Maryland Building Industry Association. Welcome, Lori. You can start whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Lori Graff. I'm CEO of the Maryland Building Industry Association. I'm respectfully in opposition to House Bill 606. I did serve on the task force, the appraisal task force, and was very involved in conversations. And we support 95% of what came out of that task force. You're going to see several other bills that came out of that task force, and we definitely support all of those. We just have some concerns about this, as well as already mentioned, and I think it's a policy decision of do we mandate use of a privately owned for-profit organization? And that's something that I think this body just needs to make that decision. Are we going to mandate that? And I would also make the argument, I mean, maybe we need to fix SDAT. Maybe if SDAT's not accurate. If you haven't gone on to SDAT and looked, you can see the purchase price of your house, the purchase price, the last person that purchased it, and those types of things. If that is not accurate enough, then maybe we need to look at that. But we just have some concerns about mandating us to be a member of a for-profit entity. So that's our concerns. We're happy to talk about it. I had some conversations with the gentleman who testified in favor of it out in the hallway. We can certainly come up with some different solutions, but, and I did flag this during the task force process, had concerns, mentioned that I would be happy to work on it through the task force process, but it never came to fruition. So with that, we asked for an unfavorable report, but happy to work on other solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first off, I want to thank you for your participation in the task force. We did have very lively discussions about this topic and other topics as well during that 12-month period. And I really appreciate your time frame in being in that. I want to talk about SDAT. When I search for comps, obviously, I use the multiple listing service. I cannot figure out a way to search for comps on SDAT. I can find a specific property on SDAT, and I can find on SDAT when it was sold and for how much. But how do we get SDAT to be comparable to the ease of use as the MLS? For example, if I wanted to see the value of a property in a certain area, I can pop into MLS, find me properties 0.5 miles from this address, and MLS lists them all, which is how realtors give that information to the appraiser when the appraiser comes by and knocks on the door and says, let me appraise this house. You can't do that with SDAT. So any suggestions on how to make SDAT comparable to the ease of use with MLS?
I am not an IT professional, but I hear you on that, and I do see the point. I think that there should be some way that we could, because SDAT does have the information. I understand that it's the sales price, it's not all the other information that maybe you'd be looking for, but this bill only calls for the sales price. But I would think there would be a way, again, I'm not an IT professional, to maybe fix that piece of SDAT so that you could do a geography search.
Thank you, Ms. Graff. And again, I appreciate your time frame with the task force.
Absolutely.
Delegate Lewis.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Graff. I appreciate your testimony and your perspective. But like Delegate Holmes, I'm trying to figure out what's the alternative to MLIS. Reforming or redesigning SDAT sounds like a huge lift. Also, in your letter, you mentioned that builders don't even have access. Builders and another group don't even have access to MLIS. So it doesn't have any utility for them, there's no use to them. So I'm just really confused about the fragmentation, and it's an industry that, I'm kind of unfamiliar with. Can you help us understand?
Yeah, and this was the
better?
Conversation we had before the hearing. So builders do not use realtors, generally speaking. They sometimes do. They may have a contract with a realtor, but a lot of the builders do not use realtors. They have their own in-house sales team that they have other avenues of advertising their communities and that type of thing. So they're not employing realtors. And I think that's maybe a misnomer that people think that they're employing realtors. They are not employing realtors. So this would require them to then join the multiple list service, which up to this point, there's no reason for them to join because they aren't using the realtors. Now, again, some of them use realtors. My understanding, I'm not an MLS expert, but my understanding is once you join it, you have to list everything, and there's a lot of rules and requirements with MLS. It's a service that they're using, and they have a lot of rules and regulations within MLS that you have to do. So some builders do employ realtors, and in that case, they may put it on MLS. But to this point, most builders do not employ realtors, real estate agents.
And and this may be really basic, and I hope my colleagues will indulge me, but how do builders decide what to charge for the properties they construct and put on the market? Do they not use comps?
I think they probably do use comps, but a lot of it has to do with, it's a little bit of a different process than resales because you have your costs of your land. There's to build in Maryland, it generally takes between 2 to 5 years to even get your entitlements. It's a very long, drawn-out process. So there's land regulations, all the other things that go into it. So you have a lot of upfront costs that you maybe don't have with the resale market. And of course, it's just like any other industry. It's what people will pay, right? It's the market, whatever the market will bear. But there is a lot of, you have to kind of look at all of your expenses to start with. Whereas resales, it's much more about what did my neighbors sell for, how many rooms are in the house, that kind of thing.
Got it. Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Graff, I'm really trying to narrow down what your objection is. Is it the cost?
It's partially the cost. It's just an added layer of things that is already on the development community that we have to do. So some of it's the cost, some of it's the time. I mean, they would honestly, in some cases, have to put a lot of time into putting these on when it's just another added layer. And honestly, we're not part of MLS. And it's kind of a policy decision. Does this body want to go down the road of requiring a industry to use something that is a for-profit entity? I think that's really what it comes down to. And it's a policy decision that I think needs to be made.
If I may, Mr. Chair, is your organization a for-profit entity?
No.
Okay. And if we could find a way for you to do this at no expense, would you still have the same objection?
I mean, I'd have to go back to our members because I think a lot of it has to do with time. But I mean, I certainly could ask and find out if there's I don't think that we would have an objection, but I can't make that commitment. I'd have to ask my members.
One more question, if I may. Mr. Chair.
But Lori said it's okay.
Lori said it's okay. That's why I asked you. But, so you've heard the testimony that this was an equity issue. Are your members concerned about the fact that this could cause some inequity in purchases? Have you taken that to them?
Yes, when we talk, I mean, they're very full aware of the appraisal task force. I was a part of it. We've also reviewed several other pieces of legislation that you guys, I don't think, have heard yet, dealing with the task force, and we support all of those. We are very much inclusive. We always review a lot of bills dealing with environmental justice. There's a lot of other things that we review and we look at, and we certainly are concerned about that. And we live in Maryland too, and we live in these communities, and we want to make sure we have good housing for everyone. Affordable housing is a huge issue for us. So we are absolutely, there's just some concerns about this particular piece of legislation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 606. We'll turn to Delegate Grammer, House Bill 549, nuisance and breach of lease actions, rodent arborage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll get started with your permission. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Robin Grammer here to present House Bill 549. House Bill 549 puts in place nuisance and breach of lease actions for rodent harborage. The damage resulting from rodent harborage is not only disgusting, it is a threat to the community and public health. It is the ultimate sign of a tipping point. A single property that harbors rats can be a terror to the surrounding street or block. A property that harbors rats is usually the primary driver for a person or a family to move from an area. In Maryland, you can file for injunctive relief for nuisance abatement. House Bill 549 declares that rat harborage is a nuisance, adding it to the list of items for which a party may receive injunctive relief. It also defines the term and specifies the available relief and damages. The change from last year the change from 2 years ago is the breach of lease action. People living with rodent harborage frequently ask, what can I do to stop living with the rats? This bill provides injunctive relief in an attempt to answer that question. This bill excludes agricultural properties, as you can't prevent a field mouse from living in a field. I ask that we not let communities fall past the tipping point and that we protect private property. With that, I'd be happy to take questions, and I'd ask for a favorable on House Bill 549.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor? Vice Chair Boyce.
Good to see you, Delegate Grammer.
Good to see you.
Just one clarification, given the unfavorable testimony from the Public Justice Center. If I'm a tenant and essentially I have a very clean property, it's wonderful, but essentially I'm not causing a rat issue, it's actually my landlord. Does this bill allow me, is the main point of this bill is to allow someone like me, a tenant, to potentially sue my landlord for providing housing that has an infestation of rats?
It would allow the tenant to sue the landlord or any other person, as long as they are, fact-finding found guilty of rodent harborage.
So the landlord?
Yeah, that's correct. They could sue the landlord.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, thank you, Delegate Grammer. We have an unfavorable witness in person if they're here. Matt Hill, Public Justice Center. Go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matt Hill. I'm an attorney at the Public Justice Center. We are opposed to the bill. I do agree with Delegate Grammer that rodents are a significant health and safety issue for so many of our clients. Our concern is that breach of lease statute sets out that someone has breached the lease. It doesn't delineate what all constitutes a breach of the lease. The lease is left between the landlord and the tenant. So first, this could lead to a slippery slope in which next year this committee is being asked to further delineate what constitutes a breach of lease for a leaking ceiling or the heat or some other aspect. So I'd urge the committee not to go down that road. In 90% of leases, if the tenant is harboring rodents, that's already a breach of the lease, unless there's some special arrangement that's in the lease itself. that's going to be a breach of the lease. The landlord could already take the tenant to court because of that breach. So we don't see the point of this bill in that respect. And we don't want the committee to go down the road again of delineating what constitutes a breach and what doesn't. And our second point is just that it is challenging. It is challenging to determine who has caused a rodent issue in the property. Is it the tenant's cleanliness? Is it the landlord's failure to fix various holes in the walls? Is there a vacant property next door and the rodents are coming from the vacant into the tenant's building, which is virtually impossible to address? And so these are very complicated issues. Tenants can already sue their landlord if the landlord is the cause of the rodent harborage. And so we do not favor trying to address those issues within the context of the breach of lease statute. So with that, we ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on Delegate Huey?
Thank you very much for your testimony, and I'm glad you stepped up because I had a question. What if a tenant is in a situation where they have a year lease and they are being harmed by rats that they have, it's not their fault, they haven't done anything wrong, as the Vice Chair said, how do they break the lease, or what do they do to get out of there so that they could find another place to live that's better for their family?
Yes, so they would they could sue the landlord for a rent escrow if they want to put their money into escrow with the court until the repairs are made, and the escrow court can also terminate the lease. Additionally, this committee and the General Assembly passed last year the Tenant Safety Act, which allows them to sue the landlord for breach of the warranty of habitability, which also carries attorney's fees if the tenant's successful. So it's additional leverage to get the landlord to make the repairs, get a reduction in the rent, terminate the lease. So there are, because of this committee's work, a number of tools available now.
So I just wanted that to be stated so that people know that they have, there are alternatives already in existence. And I appreciate you being there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you. I have two questions for you. So first of all, I'm looking inside of the bill. I know you're not tracking it that way. Maybe on page 3, though, is where I'm looking at here, line 23. In that section there, it seems to me to limit it only to rodent harborage. So you just talked about a minute ago how it could open up to all kinds of other things, but that seems really specific there. It's not talking about leaking ceilings or any of that other stuff you just talked about there. So where in the bill are you seeing that it opens it up to all these other things?
Right. So my point was that the breach of lease statute right now doesn't list any particular action as a breach of lease. It simply says the lease is between the two parties, privity of contract, and if either party, well, in this case, it's the landlord seeking repossession of the real property, so it'd be the tenant breaching one of the provisions of the lease. And so this would be an unprecedented step to actually say that regardless of what the lease says, regardless of your contractual rights, we're going to say that rodent harborage is always a breach of the lease. And so my question is that it's a slippery slope for others to come back to this committee next year and say, well, we think this should always be a breach of the lease, or we think this should always be a breach of the lease. Again, in 90% of the leases I've seen, if the tenant is not maintaining the property in a clean way that's causing a rodent infestation, that's going to be a breach of the lease already. And so why is this committee going down the road of delineating exactly what or what doesn't constitute a breach of a contract that's between two parties that the General Assembly is not involved in?
Sure. Mr. Chair, may I ask one more? Yes. Thank you. So I guess kind of to follow up on that, so isn't the court system, wouldn't they still be involved here, right? So couldn't they still make a determination as to who's at fault? I mean, yes. Don't we trust judges to be able to make that determination, whether it's the landlord or the tenant? Yes. So I guess I'm not following your line of thought there then. I mean, there is still a check and balance here to determine who's at fault.
Correct. The court would make that determination. It's just unclear to me why the committee is wanting to delineate rodent harborage as some extra special condition that, I mean, you know, who's causing it? Is the standard causation? Are you trying to change the current, you know, common law understanding of causation? I don't know, and I'm just afraid that it causes some confusion and chaos within the court system.
Sure, and I can appreciate that, but I would say that rodents are fundamentally different than some of the other things you talked about there. I mean, we can go back many years, and there was this whole thing like the bubonic plague, right? They bring all kinds of bad things to not just the person living in that particular unit, but to the community as a whole. So maybe we should kind of think about them in a slightly different way than a leaking pipe or whatever the case may be. Not to say that that isn't something bad for the tenant. We shouldn't correct those, but maybe these pose a larger community issue that maybe we should think about them in a slightly different way. Isn't that so?
I totally agree. As someone who's had a rat infestation in his home and whose kids refer to the area as the rat cave in which they sometimes come in, it's extremely challenging to get rid of rodents, and to say that this is usually going to be the tenant's fault just defies our common experience of how rodents work and the very challenging way to get rid of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 549. We'll turn to Delegate Wims, House Bill 581, real property condominiums assessments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it all right, so I'll bring up my one panelist? Come up, please, come up, Mike. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and esteemed members of the House Environmental and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Greg Wims, presenting House Bill 581, Real Property Condominiums Assessments. This bill aims to address the difficulties condominium boards face in maintaining facilities and for their respective communities. Many condo boards require a majority of the unit owners to vote and approve an increase in their annual assessment as outlined by the governing documents. Unfortunately, condo boards have found themselves in a position where they do not have the financial means to pay for maintenance costs. This is because unit owners do not participate in the meetings to achieve a quorum or vote against increase altogether. Years may go by without an increase in the assessment, leaving condo boards financially compromised over time. This bill would allow the condo boards to increase an assessment by no more than 5% without the approval of the condo owners. This is a sponsored technical amendment that aims to clarify the language but does not change the intent. While no one wants to increase in fees, it is necessary to make sure the community have the funds to deliver essential services to its residents. The bill would help condo boards maintain their financial standing while providing a safe and pleasant living place for their relatives. And I wanted to say to the board why this was important to me. In December, we made two visits to two different condo areas in the Montgomery Village area in District 39. We had the the commander of the police department. We had the director for HHS for homeless and business owners. In one area, we found an encampment, actually, behind the condos in a wooded area. And what we found later was that to clean up that encampment, it would cost about $5,000. And the only company that agreed to do it was ProServe. The other was behind a condo area where there was a lot of thefts, not only in breaking into cars, but also some homes. And what we found is that the condo management said it would cost much more money to light these areas than they had. So with that, I urge a favorable report, and my panel will be here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. I'm sorry, do you have testimony, or are you really just here for questions?
I have both. With testimony.
I have testimony and
please go ahead.
Questions. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, members of the committee. My name is Mike Conroy. I'm the Executive Vice President of Montgomery Village Foundation, the large-scale homeowners association responsible for the planned community of Montgomery Village, located in Delegate Wims District in Montgomery County. Thank you for this opportunity to lend our support for HB 581, which will allow the Board of Directors of a Maryland condominium to make a 5% increase in the annual assessment in the event that unit owners do not vote to adopt the budget proposed by that board, notwithstanding a specific provision in their governing documents. It's often assumed that HOAs and condo associations make arbitrary rules and raise fees, and that no tangible results come from those. But the reality is that regular maintenance, upkeep of the community, and service contracts are often the bulk of an association's expenses. Frankly, none of those things are glamorous, but they're needed and need to be funded. These basic services, along with the funding mechanisms, are part of the primary fiduciary duties of an association's volunteer board of directors. And when that board is not able to perform these duties, they're held accountable by the community. In many older condominiums in the state, master deeds, bylaws, or other governing documents contain certain provisions that require a council of co-owners, or all unit owners, to approve the annual assessment for the condominium. If the unit owners do not approve that proposed assessment, the previous year's assessment stands, and when approval is withheld year after year, a board is unable to address the rising costs of materials, labor, and necessary service contracts. As a management agent for several condominiums within our planned community, MVF has experienced the deterioration of property that is caused by the failure of unit owners to face the reality of rising costs. Volunteer condominium boards are elected by their owners, and they act in good faith on behalf of the owners to meet the safety and maintenance standards for those properties. HB 581 will increase a condominium board's ability to properly set annual assessments to accomplish these goals and to fulfill their fiduciary duties. Therefore, MVF respectfully requests a favorable report on HB 581. Thank you.
Thank you. First question is from Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for bringing the bill. I just want to make sure I understand who you're giving the authority to increase the fee.
This would be for specific condominium boards of directors to approve a budget no more than 5% if their unit owners vote no for that increase, if they have the specific provision in their governing documents that say all of the unit owners must approve that budget.
So the board, if I may, so the board of directors approves the increase without, is this a condo? I'm sorry.
Yes.
So the board of directors authorizes the increase without the unit owner's approval.
If the unit owners were to vote no, then the board of directors would have the authority to increase that budget over the previous year by 5%.
Thank you.
Other questions? Delegate Terrassa?
Okay, sorry, just to clarify, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, so it wouldn't automatically go up 5%, it's just allowing the board to do that?
That is correct.
Okay, I think the part that confused me a little is putting it for a vote and then saying, it doesn't matter what your vote is, then yes. But I do understand the problem we're trying to solve, so I appreciate that.
Further questions? Okay, thank you. We have a favorable amendment, virtual witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jeannie Hyatt. Ms. Hyatt, are you there? Okay, I'm going to move on. We have an unfavorable virtual witness, Jeannie Polhas from Cross Keys. Please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Corman, for allowing me to give my opinion on this bill. It just seems like all the bills that are being presented to the legislature this year regarding condos are done by delegates from Montgomery and Prince George's County. There are many other counties in the state of Maryland. I am a condo owner in Baltimore City. We do not have these problems, but I will tell you, if you put a cap of 5% on the operating budget, I sit on the board, so I help make these budgets. Our repairs and our supplies have gone up more than double in the past 2 years. So we many times have to raise our operating fund to accommodate that. If you're going to keep a 5% cap, then there are going to be a lot of repairs, a lot of maintenance, and a lot of preventative maintenance that isn't going to get done because we're not allowed to tap into the reserve fund, which that is a whole nother story, which was poorly written. But anyway, I have to vote no on this bill. I'm sorry. I am a condo owner. I'm elderly. I am not moving anywhere, but this will destroy condo ownership in the state of Maryland. Thank you.
We have an additional unfair witness, Steve Horvath, HOA United. I think you're on mute. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. We just can't hear you. It's not that you're on mute. Something's going on with your system. We can't hear you, Mr. Horvath. I know you submitted something in writing, so just for efficiency, I'm going to move on, but we know how to reach you, and we'll probably see you on another bill later today. So thanks for being on. Might want to work on that audio for the next bill. Seeing no questions, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 581. Let's move to HB 705. Delegate Valderrama, real property short-term rentals.
Mr. Chairman, I bring out my panel with me. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, esteemed members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, Chris Valderrama here to present House Bill 705. I will just say that quite simply, the legislation, all it simply does is to allow a tenant to offer their rental as a short-term rental, as would be done, such as what Airbnb would do, but only when a municipality or the county allows the short-term rentals by the property owners themselves. So the bill further provides important protections to the property owner by requiring their permission to the short-term rental before it can be listed or advertised. The property owner has the absolute discretion to veto short-term rentals under this legislation, regardless of the plain language of a local ordinance or regulation. I would like to add that similar legislation has been passed across the water from us in Virginia last year and was signed into law, and it was made effective on July of last year. It would also be worth mentioning that there are many cities throughout the nation that have implemented this measure as well. Here in Maryland, Montgomery County also adopted this provision into their county code, which also became effective last year of July. And in doing so, the county council recognized that rental units are disproportionately non-white, and a prohibition against short-term rentals by lessees cuts out approximately 35% of Montgomery County households from the extra income a short-term rental could earn. The council also noted that such a restriction has racial equity element. And finally, the council recognized that many rental agreements prohibit sublets, which would be enforceable absent the landlord's assent to the short-term rental. The District of Columbia Council is currently considering a similar provision. I would also like to again note that while the right to offer a rental unit as a short-term rental has important protections for the property owner. So 3 points. The legislation does not limit a county or municipality from enacting short-term rental regulations. Second, it requires permission from the property owner as an absolute condition to the short-term rental. And third, it does nothing to overturn a lease's express sublet prohibition. So this legislation would provide an important source of income to many Maryland renters who Airbnb determined about 60% are female and who earn an average of $13,000 in additional income through short-term rentals. And with these points, I would urge this committee to move favorable on House Bill 705.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Vincent Fralici. I'm a resident of Arlington, Virginia, and I am the public policy manager for Maryland for Airbnb. Thank you for the chance to be here. Citizen-led tourism is an economic lifeline for many Maryland hosts, and it distributes tourism dollars to cities where hotels have not invested. In 2023, approximately 800,000 people, mostly from Maryland, visited other people in Maryland and stayed with an Airbnb host. And we calculated on behalf of the committee today in support of this piece of legislation that the short-term rentals in Maryland, whether they be utilized on Airbnb or our competitors' platforms, generate somewhere near $200 million towards the GDP of the state of Maryland. And this is by only sharing and having activity take place in less than 1% of the homes in the state of Maryland. We support the bill also because it's an initiative that was taken up and a priority of the Black Caucus in Virginia in last session. The bill went into effect in July, and it's simply just we support the ability for anyone to get a short-term rental license, whether they've been fortunate enough to get to own a piece of property, or if they're a tenant with the permission of the property owner to be able to generate extra income. Thank you for the opportunity, and we support the legislation.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Jamie Gregory here on behalf of Airbnb. The objective, as mentioned, is very straightforward. If a local jurisdiction allows short-term rentals, those same regulations apply to tenants as they do to the property owners. The landlord needs to provide permission, and the underlying lease takes precedence. Tenants are already located in parts of the jurisdiction with rentals allowed. The underlying lease between the property owner and the tenant that includes maintenance and upkeep requirements will still be in effect and apply to the property. Delegate Valderrama mentioned the Montgomery County Council and the bill they passed that went into effect in July. It's just worth emphasizing that the council proactively changed the wording in the bill to allow tenants to do short-term renting. And then finally, the HB 705 simply provides tenants the same opportunity to benefit from short-term renting if their landlord approves. This bill does not prevent counties or municipalities from enacting short-term rental regulations. The bill does not change agreements between landlords and tenants. Landlords will still have the right to decide whether to allow subletting in their properties. The bill does say that tenants cannot be excluded by the local regulatory body if they allow short-term renting for property owners. This legislation will allow more Marylanders to earn extra income if their landlord grants their permission and they follow the local regulations for short-term renting. We ask for your favorable report.
Question, Delegate Seekler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is probably a really dumb question, but why would a municipality enact an ordinance against having tenants? I mean, have problems arisen that have caused municipalities to enact such ordinances?
What we have found is that Airbnb, at least, was invented in 2008, and most of the regulations that were written by cities took place in the 15, 16, 17 timeframe, like the city of Baltimore. And when they thought about writing those regulations, they only thought about the reality of a homeowner doing it. And so what some cities have in their laws is saying that the homeowner shall. And therefore, the laws on the local level, on a spotty way, just speak to landowners, not to the possibility of a tenant.
So are you saying as an oversight, essentially, rather than in response to a problem?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, as an oversight. I mean, there's already so many major cities that allow it in Maryland, just a few that do not, and so many majors around the United States, too. But sometimes it has to be amended in some of the cities that have allowed it recently.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. I just have one quick question. I wanted to know if there are any kind of, if this bill affects in any way the ability to impose some kind of tax on the rentals for these short-term rentals.
No. The short answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Sarasa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really quickly, so you said there's only a few cities that allow, in Maryland, that allow like Airbnb or short-term rentals. Is that what you were saying?
No, I was saying that there were only a couple of cities that in Maryland that we know about that do not allow tenants. But
so
go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so then why not go to those cities and change it? Is there something in our law that prohibits the locals from changing it?
Well, I think there's legislation coming through later. Actually, this committee heard legislation on this earlier this year. Most of the non-charter counties do not have the authority at the moment. So this is a little part of this is getting ahead of sort of broader regulation. If that makes sense.
Okay,
And
the chartered counties can change it, so you could go to them, but you're saying the non-chartered counties can't change it?
well, they have to come to the State House for local authority.
Okay.
And I will just piggybacking on something that Vincent said is that the Montgomery County law that was changed last year, they were changing their original bill from the 2016-17 time period. They went back because, as Vincent mentioned, the way they wrote it, they inadvertently excluded tenants, and
But they fixed that, so
They
it
fixed
could be done on the local level. Do you know how many of the places that don't allow for lessees to rent, to do these short-term rentals, how many of those are non-chartered counties?
no, but we can find out. I can get that answer.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is about preemption. My understanding is since there's no preemption language in this legislation, that you are not attempting to preempt any existing county law. Are there existing? I know there are laws around how long you can rent out a short-term rental. When I was on the county council in Prince George's, we debated that then, and I think limited it to 180 days in a calendar year. So there's no language around that. But do any of the 9 charter counties have similar laws to this? And is it accurate that you wouldn't be preempting them if they do?
I can tell you that the largest jurisdictions in the Maryland that we're aware of that do not allow tenants by, as the fellow delegate mentioned, we believe is an oversight. It's the city of Baltimore and Prince George's County. But the reality is that in the growth of citizen-led tourism around the state, there might be small cities that are already not allowing tenants. And remember, whatever platform you generally use for citizen-led tourism, whether it's VRBO or Booking.com or Airbnb, most people are keeping about 90 cents of the booking and sharing a 10% commission. So we see it as something that is just fairness, that anyone should be able to share their home or their apartment wherever they are across the state.
Okay, but what is the relevance of I'm sorry, I don't know who mentioned the charter counties. What is the relevance to the charter counties?
Oh, just that they have their own land use authority. And that they don't need to come to the legislature for local authority.
So Delegate Valderrama, if we could get the follow-up on those 9 charter counties and what they have in place right now. And was the statement correct about preemption, that if there's no preemption language, if the bill is silent on that, that means you're not trying to preempt anything already on the books? Is that correct? To override or preempt any local law that is already in place?
Well, it's not preempting the county's ability to regulate or municipalities from regulating short-term rentals, but it is preempting to say that if you allow it for the property owner, then you have to allow the same opportunity to tenants.
Okay, and is Mako here? Is Mako, okay. Yeah. So I guess they're going to testify. We can do the follow-up offline.
And Vincent didn't mention this, but in Virginia, the Virginia Association of Counties did support the bill.
And so did the Virginia version of our MML.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you all very much. We have also in-person favorable Brianna January for Chamber of Progress.
Yeah, we got it.
Thank you, Delegate. ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, esteemed committee. Brianna January with Chamber of Progress, in strong support of HB 705. Chamber of Progress is a tech industry coalition advocating for the progressive future of tech and inclusive access to that future. Our members do include Airbnb, but they do not have a vote or veto on our positions. HB 705 safeguards homeowners' rights to use their residences as short-term rentals and allows their tenants to do the same. And committee, as you heard from the good bill sponsor, this issue is one of fairness and opportunity. Restricting renters from participating in the short-term rental market disproportionately impacts Black and Hispanic Marylanders, exacerbating existing economic disparities, especially considering that in Maryland, the white homeownership rate is at almost 79%, while the Black homeownership rate is around 53% and the Hispanic around 55%. Additionally, HB 705 is good for small businesses and local economies. Visitors who opt for short-term rentals over traditional hotels and lodging contribute to local economies not only directly to their hosts, but also by patronizing nearby shops and restaurants. Lastly, committee, increasing access to STR hosting also protects consumer choice. STRs offer more flexibility for visitors with needs that traditional hotels alone cannot meet, whether they are families traveling, long-term travelers, or visitors with unique abilities and needs. Committee, the balanced framework offered by HB 705 empowers Marylanders to generate supplemental income while fostering economic growth and allowing visitors to choose the best option for their personal circumstances. For these reasons, Chamber of Progress urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for this panelist? Okay, we have a virtual favorable witness, Marabee Korpenning. Please go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Ms. Vice Chair, and committee members. I am Marby Korpenning, and I support the HB 705. I've been in Prince George's County for about 30 years, 20 years in hospitality. I've previously owned a bed and breakfast. Right now, I do short-term rental through my landlord. He authorized it. I lost my bed and breakfast during the real estate crash and lost my home. I lost my business, and still to this day haven't recovered. But my previous landlords, where I am now, and I've been here 20 years, know how much I love doing this, how much hospitality. I've enjoyed this. It is my life. It's my purpose, what I do. I am located, but with landlord's permission, I do this. I am located at National Harbor. My guests range from business attendees to conferences at the harbor. I'm near Andrews and Bowling Air Force Base, so I get military members as well as government members, couples having a romantic weekend, going for entertainment at National Harbor as well. And even the local mom who just needs a getaway. It's a very peaceful, beautiful, serene place. My travelers range through Airbnb most often. I get a lot of international travelers as well from, Germany, Russia. Truly, I was surprised. Even a recent one, Poland, Africa, China. I've had people from all over who find me through Airbnb, and always 5-star rating. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Everything.
We have a lot of people nodding their heads about wanting to go try out your accommodations. Any questions?
I invite you all to. Please do.
Thank you so much. We'll turn to a virtual favorable amendment witness if her sound is working. Jeannie Hyatt. Jeannie Hyatt.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Actually, this is on the short-term leases.
Yep.
Okay. I would have to say that I support it. I'm not going to even take my 2 minutes. I would give it to the other speaker if I could. I just think at this point that I can't think of any good reasons against, as long as there's something in the lease that protects everybody. So I would just say that I think, no offense, we have so many regulations. I think that a short-term lease, as long as there's plenty in the contract, is fine. Now, you didn't define short-term, so maybe something in the bill should talk about that, but I definitely would be for, shorter than a year because of the reasons given. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions. So we have some unfavorable witnesses in person, Amy Rohrer from the Maryland Hotel Lodging Association and Don Bochco from the Maryland Association of Counties, to tell us why the Virginia Association of Counties apparently got it wrong. Hold on, we got to get your mics back on. Oh, there we go.
Is it on?
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Amy Rohrer, here on behalf of the Maryland Hotel Lodging Association in opposition to House Bill 705. I will be brief. Both hotels and short-term rentals are regulated at the local level. And this is appropriate since local leaders best understand the needs of their community. Short-term rentals have unique impacts on residential neighborhoods throughout Maryland, and we are simply opposed to any effort to limit local authority on this issue. We respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 705.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Don Bochco with the Maryland Association of Counties, here in opposition to House Bill 705. To be clear, House Bill 705 is a bad bill. House Bill 705 is an anti-affordable housing bill. I'm very happy that the legislation in Virginia was brought up because the legislation in Virginia is very different from the bill that you have in front of you right now. This bill is intentionally left more broadly because this is meant to encourage a practice called Airbnb arbitrage. What is Airbnb arbitrage? This is the practice of renting multiple apartments at an affordable rate, putting them on a site like Airbnb, VRBO, and then turning a profit. This bill is nothing more than using Maryland's affordable housing supply to pad the books of Airbnb. This is a bad bill. This is an anti-affordable housing bill, and we respectfully urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Any questions? Delegate Stewart.
All right, Dom, you've piqued my interest here. Will you explain this Airbnb arbitrage thing one more time? Sorry, I missed it.
So there's actually a lot of interesting data on it. New York City has a lot. So basically, it is about you can rent multiple units if the landowner doesn't care, or you can go to multiple apartment buildings. You get them at an affordable rate. People actually turn this into a business, and then you put them on a short-term rental site for a higher rate than what you're renting them at. New York, again, historically, they have the best data on it, but there were tons of folks going in, and actually there was a spike in the increase in rents because of this arbitrage.
Couldn't you do that already with just subleasing them?
No, because this is different. Subleasing them is just you're going to have a long-term rental. This is actually taking units out of the housing supply and using them for short-term. So you're using it effectively as a hotel instead of as just a unit to house somebody.
Do any cities currently ban subleasing?
I would have to go back and look. I believe that's varied.
Can they even?
Subleasing, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look.
What would be if the Airbnb arbitrage thing proved to be like a huge problem? Couldn't municipalities, even under the language of this bill, just like, for example, charge the renter/arbitrager like $1,000 for a short-term rental license?
So I think that's a great question. What can municipalities or counties do under this bill? And we view this as actually being incredibly broad. Cannot pass a local law or ordinance prohibiting an operator from offering. So you heard the proponent saying that, well, this doesn't impact local regulatory authority. The way this is drafted, we interpret this as, well, if we adopt a regulation that they're interpreting it as prohibiting their operation, that they can take us to court and challenge us on this. We actually interpret this as being pretty broad and would undermine a lot of the local policies.
What does the Virginia one say?
The Virginia one actually has language that says that leasee is limited to 1 unit. And so if you rent a unit, you can only put that 1 unit on a short-term rental site. You can't rent multiple units and then put multiple units on the site. It's Virginia Association of Counties asked for that. That is a very clear trying to prevent this, again, sucking up of affordable housing supply. This bill was put in intentionally without that language.
So that prevents the arbitrage thing, but it protects the sort of one renter who wants the ability to sublet to short-term, just as they already have the ability to do presumably short-term, long-term.
Correct, yeah.
And you guys would drop your opposition if we adopted similar language?
It would definitely take care of a lot of the heartburn.
Okay, thanks.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Always good to see you both. Dom, I had some questions because there were questions earlier about charter counties and how they do things differently. And I know like in Baltimore County, there's very specific rules about renting to number of people who aren't family. There's rules about that around the Towson University area. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on the charter county part, or charter versus other counties?
So I'm a little confused on what the proponents meant by that, because Queen Anne's County, which is not a charter county, actually did some amazing work on trying to modernize their short-term rental policy. They went through that, did not have any kind of constitutional burdens. They already have that authority right now. So we're a little confused on what those comments actually mean.
Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to ask the same question to you as I asked to the favorable panel. Why would a municipality enact an ordinance prohibiting blah, 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 prohibiting
short-term rentals?
Yeah, short-term rentals by renters.
Yeah, so it really ranges. So for example, the city of Annapolis, I mean, who does not want to live in Annapolis? But Annapolis also has a well-noted affordable housing issue. And so, perfect example, my boyfriend used to live on Fleet Street. He does not anymore because his apartment was bought and turned into a short-term rental. And so we're seeing this in communities that, everyone wants to go to, visit, and live. And we're seeing the housing stock, which is already limited, being converted into these short-term rentals. And so this is a very real phenomenon we're seeing in multiple pockets throughout the state.
So a town could enact such an ordinance in order to preserve their affordable housing stock.
That is the main.
Or their workforce housing stock.
Correct. That's the main concern when these ordinances are enacted.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Delegate Healy?
I'm interested in what Delegate Stewart was asking about, and the language in Virginia says one person for one, so that if it's your home and you lease it out, or it's your second home and you lease it out, that's allowed in the Virginia scheme. Is that correct?
So currently under the Virginia scheme, it says like one leasee, and I can forward everyone the exact information, but it says one leasee can put 1 unit. So if you are in an apartment and you want to put your unit up on a short-term rental, or if you're in an apartment building and you want to rent 2 units and you think you're going to have that second unit as your short-term rental business, that's allowed under the Virginia law. That also explicitly prohibits potentially taking over multiple units and doing that. It's very clear.
What about if you had, is there any geographic limit to it? For example, if you could have one in the whole state of Virginia or one in a certain area of Virginia. In other words, I can understand not wanting to overwhelm one small community, but if you have one in Norfolk and you have one in Richmond and you have one in Arlington, how do they affect each other?
I believe that statute's written statewide. That being said, I'll revisit it and happy to share it with everybody.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I believe that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 705. We'll turn to House Bill 363, Delegate Homes, Common Ownership Communities, Candidate or Proposition Signs, Display Period.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair. Ladies and gentlemen of this fantastic committee, I will attempt to be as brief as possible with the entire portfolio before us this afternoon. House Bill 336 is relevant to campaign signs. As we all know, there in some jurisdictions within the state of Maryland, there is a campaign season upon us. current laws in those campaign signs do not account for special elections or early elections that we're seeing in certain jurisdictions within the state. There is no law that authorizes or lets persons have campaign signs during these special election periods. That's all this bill does. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will take questions.
Great, thank you. Just for my edification, the rules that we currently have were set up before we had early voting. Now we have early voting, so the dates in this bill just tee off of early voting instead of just an election day.
That is exactly correct, Mr. Chair.
Great. Okay, Delegate Naraki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, I thought, and our legal advisor, Delegate Stewart, has left for a moment, but he would have been all over this. But I thought there was a decision a couple years ago that struck down all time prohibitions and things like that with respect to signage. Is that not the case? I thought there was a federal court case that did that in Maryland.
I'm not familiar with the federal court case scenario. I don't recall it, to tell you the truth.
I'm pretty sure there was. In Baltimore County, there used to be provisions with respect to time, placement, size, all those sorts of things, and they were all struck down because of freedom of speech issues.
Well, they're in existing language, you'll see that in the bill. Existing language does not allow you to prohibit signs if they, or to adjust alterations in signage based upon federal laws.
Okay.
That's in existing law. All this does is change the ability to put signage up when you have early voting.
Okay.
So federal laws, state laws, and all of that are not affected at all. That changes nothing. The current law for federal, state does not change at all. This only takes this bill only takes place when we're talking about early voting scenarios, which is was not in the existing language.
Okay.
That's all it does.
Thank you.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My recollection is the same as Delegate Naraki's, that this was a First Amendment issue and that it was a constitutional issue. But I could be wrong. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional scholar. But I do recall something like that.
Yeah, and again, you see, the existing law does not change anything relevant to federal regulations or federal laws. This only is relevant to early voting.
No, I understand, but I think it would, well, anyway, I think that I would like to know if there was such a court case. But that's not my question.
Okay.
My question is this on common property or is this on private property as well?
Yes, that's a good question. The way the bill, this is for common, does not affect common area, it's your property.
So I can only put a sign up 30 days before the start of early voting on my property?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just to clarify, today, under existing law, you can only put a political sign up on your property if you live in one of these HOAs 30 days before the actual election day, is that right?
The actual election, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And isn't it so that there was a court case, but we've gone to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General still thinks our law has effect? So if we want to update our law, we need to pass your bill. Isn't that so?
That is exactly correct.
Great. And isn't it so that I'll circulate that to everybody so they can all see it? Great. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We do have a virtual unfavorable amendment witness. We'll see if his sound is working. Steve Horvath from HOA United.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. I talked with the Verizon guy. They set me up. Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. Steve Horvath for HOA United. I'd like to first respond to Delegate Naraki and Delegate Foley's questions. The First Amendment protects the rights of private citizens with regard to the government. The First Amendment does not protect the rights of homeowners with their homeowners association or condo. That's a private contract, and believe it or not, we do not have the right in the private contract that citizens have with their government with the Constitution, which is our founding contract of the country. So that's a really important thing. COCs are built on a regime of restrictions, not on a regime of rights like we have with the government. So I implore all of you to really think about that as you consider all these bills in their totality. We recommend a favorable with amendment on this bill 363 brought by Delegate Holmes. And what we've provided in our testimony is would encourage you with respect to those questions from Delegate Foley and Naraki to use language from the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, or even from Washington State or other states that have simplified everything, gotten rid of the time requirements. So here's the suggestion. An association may not prohibit the display of signs, including outdoor signs regarding candidates for public or association office or ballot issues on or within a unit or limited common element, which includes the lot. But an association may adopt reasonable rules pertaining to the placement and manner. Getting rid of the time requirements, having a candidate sign out 60 days before an election is completely acceptable. Again, you've just cited case law that got rid of these restrictions in municipalities, different relationship. Shouldn't have them in associations. Nobody's property values are getting wrecked by me supporting a candidate 60 days before the election. So we would just encourage your favorable with amendment report on this bill. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 363. We'll turn to House Bill 449. Delegate Holmes, condominiums, property insurance deductibles, unit owner responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This bill is a little bit more complicated, so bear with me here for a moment. This bill is relevant to condominium insurance deductibles. And quite frankly, what the language of the bill is attempting to do is to make the deductible condominium insurance easier on the entire condominium association. And the way that this does such is that this language in the bill increases the required deductible for the unit owner's insurance policy. Now, how does this make the condominium more affordable? We all know that the insurance risk industry is, in some cases, denying insurance to a lot of areas. We also know that the insurance industry is increasing insurance rates all across the United States. By increasing the unit owner's deductible requirement, and the language in the bill is increasing the deductible from the current $10,000 to $25,000. There are some jurisdictions on their own right now that have already increased their deductible. Leisure World, for example, in Leisure World, their deductible is $50,000. And the reason for that is because the master policy is now less expensive for the entire condominium community, okay? This legislation is not asking for a $50,000 deductible insurance requirement. It's asking for a $25,000 insurance deductible. Now, let me very briefly try to explain to you how this works, and I'll be as brief as I can. Let's say, for example, you live on the third floor of a condominium. You allow your sink or your tub to overflow. Your sink or your tub overflows into the unit below you and potentially the unit below that. You are the primary cause of the damage in your unit on the third floor, the unit on the second floor, and potentially the unit on the first floor. Your insurance right now is required to pay a $10,000 deductible to repair those units. And that deductible, that $10,000 deductible, is coming from your insurance company. You're not writing a check. The issue is that the insurance for damages and risk in general is beginning to increase, as I indicated at the top, all across the United States. So what we're doing is, as I indicated, is increasing the deductible from $10,000 to $25,000. And there are others on the call that can further explain this in more detail. The average cost of a unit owner to increase that deductible from $10,000 to $25,000 is about $25 to $30 a year. Okay, so $25 to $30 a year. We're hopeful we'll be able to maybe split the baby in half between the master policy paying more insurance for the entire condominium and the unit owner paying a little bit more on an annual basis, so that we can make sure that insurance policy, master policies are able to get as much insurance as they can. With that, Madam Chair, I did see that Robin Mnuchin was on the screen, and she can go into more detail with her multiple years of insurance experience. And with that, I would entertain any questions, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Delegate Holmes? Delegate Holmes, you have a Stacy Gelfeld found?
Yes.
Are they here or are they on?
I'm not on screen, perhaps. I do know that everyone got notification of the weather, and so I'm not sure if
Stacy Gelfeld is available, we'll take them next, and then we'll take the other virtual.
Sure, that's
is
fine.
That okay?
Thank
and
you,
no one
Madam
had
Chair.
questions for the delegate? Okay.
There's Robin Mnuchin there.
You can begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Corman, Delegate Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee, good afternoon. Thank you for the privilege of your time today. My name is Robin Manoogian, and I represent the Maryland Legislative Action Committee of CAI. I've been the Maryland Lax Insurance Chair for 16 years. I've also been a condominium and community association insurance broker for over 30 years. I was also a unit owner in a condominium in Maryland. As you may be aware, CAI came before this committee in 2020 pursuing an increase of the unit owner responsibility deductible from $5,000 to $10,000. And at the time, the $5,000 deductible responsibility had been in effect for about 11 years and was no longer effective. I would never have imagined that I'd be here before you again just 5 years later, seeking an increase of the owner's deductible responsibility again. But the insurance market has changed dramatically in the past 5 years, and with fewer carriers, more expensive premiums, and yes, much higher property damage deductibles, the $10,000 deductible that was valid and had merit 5 years ago is really going away in lieu of a $25,000 or even higher. I insure many associations that have deductibles of $50,000, $100,000, even $250,000. And too often these losses led to high deductibles because of losses that originated in the unit. If insurance is a transfer of risk for a premium, the association transfers its risk of loss onto an insurance company, then insurance companies are looking to transfer back some of that risk in the form of higher deductibles. The reason is because the insurance market is incredibly challenging right now. We are in the 7th year of a very hard market, and where most hard markets correct after 3 years, the insurance industry,
Just finish your last sentence, please.
Okay, what I'd like to say is because the average deductible is now much higher than $10,000, we are looking to transfer the higher deductible, but still cap it at $25,000. And we are going to be introducing a bill very soon. The burden is not going to be on the unit owners. They can transfer that burden of the deductible onto their own policy. And I'm happy to take any questions. I know that this is a
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions? I see Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for being here to explain some of this. So this is only, how does this work? Does the insurance the Maryland Insurance Administrator have a role in this? I mean, how do these two kind of things interact? Are they the same company? I mean, or are they different insurance companies?
No, they're not different insurance companies. So typically an association will have a master policy. That master policy is designed to cover the units up to the builder's original specifications, and then the owner's policy is triggered when there's damage to improvements and betterments. We have had deductible responsibility legislation in place since 2009. It was 5,000. We increased it to 10,000 in 2020. But it's truly the market that is driving these increased deductibles. It's the burden of paying the deductible now, when you have an association with an enormous deductible, the owner pays that first 10,000, but the rest of it, that subsidy, gets pushed onto all of the owners. And so, some of the testimony that I've heard from opponents is that they believe that we're going into their pockets. This is the most important thing, if you take nothing away other than this, is that if there's no transfer or no increased transfer to the owners, the association has to grab that deductible money from someplace. It comes from reserves or it comes from a special assessment. If the association applies a special assessment, there is no insurance to cover that. Whereas if we have deductible responsibility, the owner's policy can pay for that deductible responsibility.
And you can make the owner's policy do that? You can require
it already is doing it across the country. So it can be covered under either the dwelling limit of the owner's policy or their loss assessment coverage.
And if I could expand upon that, Madam Chair, in reference to Delegate Healy's question. In the example that I gave you from the third unit, second unit, et cetera, the unit owner that is responsible for the damage, like I said earlier, they don't come out of pocket and write a $10,000 check. It is their deductible that pays the master policy's deductible. And master policy, the master condominium policy, does not have to be the same insurance company as the unit owner's HO6 policy. It could be two separate companies. But the condominium association will go after the person that is responsible for the damage and say, you third floor person, you caused all this damage. Your insurance claim is going to pay the master policy $10,000 to cover the master policy's deductible. And because of the cost rising for all the insurance around the nation, these have to go up. And and like Ms. Manoogian suggested, if these deductibles do not go up, then the only opportunity that is available is that the master policy has to pay it. And that means everyone who lives there has to pay this increase. And that's why we're doing this.
Thank you. Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Delegate and Robin, I certainly agree with this bill wholeheartedly and know that there's great stress being placed on the master insurance policies because of these very large claims. One question just to confirm, the market for the HO6 insurance, I know you said, Delegate, that it's cost maybe $30 to increase it to $10,000. That's pretty robust, right? So an owner would have no trouble securing this increased coverage. Is that right?
Obviously, because I'm not in the insurance industry, I would suggest that Ms. Manoogian answer that. But the increase, like I said, is between $25 and $30 annually for the HO6, which is not zero, but it is something that I think could. Again, I'm attempting to split the baby here, so that everyone doesn't have to pay a larger amount of insurance policy through the master, but at $25, $30 per year, for each HO6 policy. You know, it kind of seems reasonable.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for Delegate Holmes or Robin? Okay, seeing none, we have a virtual favorable with amendments. Steve Horvath.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. Steve Horvath again from HOA United. We recommend a favorable with amendment report on this bill throughout. And by the way, I'm a unit owner. I'm on the board, and I've actually done the political science work of studying what every state, including in DC, has done throughout the nation on insurance and a number of other factors for common ownership communities. What Delegate Holmes described in his testimony, where a unit owner causes this loss and you have a capped limit for the maximum amount that they can be responsible, doesn't make sense. And in fact, that is the way it works in many states throughout the country. However, those other states do not limit the unit owner's liability to a portion of the deductible. They limit the liability to the entire deductible. And it's simply much more expensive if that unit owner causes a loss for all the members to pick up. Let's say they're responsible for $10,000, it's a $100,000 loss that caused damage on floors 3, 2, and 1. Easily $100,000 water loss or more. All the owners have to pick that up because the association has to fulfill that master association deductible before the insurance claim will pay anything out. Picking up that $90,000 difference is much more expensive than having the unit owners insure to the deductible. And so we would ask that you reconsider the way Maryland's doing this. You're going to be right back here hearing again in 3 to 5 more years how $25,000 isn't enough and it needs to go up to $50,000 or $75,000 or $100,000. Just eliminate the whack-a-mole and respectfully sync up the unit owner's responsibility at least to the deductible. And under cases of gross negligence, it should probably exceed the deductible. So if I decide to hang a clothes hanger off of my sprinkler head in my unit, which has happened, by the way, I get to pick up the tab. The other unit owners don't pay for that. And I would encourage you to listen to the testimony from Attorney Scott Silverman, who described how you got here, saying, and this was on February 6th to the Judicial Proceedings Committee, the thought was that the common risk of the association is better borne by the collective of the unit owners. And we essentially created this no-fault insurance in 11-114. It's not the right way to think about insurance. This isn't the way it works anywhere else. Thank you very much for hearing my testimony.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Horvath? Thank you so much. Good to see you. Glad your mics are working. We will move to the final, I believe. We have 2 unfavorable testimonies virtually. Jean Hyatt and Jeannie Polis. You can begin when you're ready.
You're on mute. Unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. We can't hear you. There you go.
Can you hear me now? No. Hello? Yes. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I admit this whole insurance thing is extremely complicated, and I've listened to everybody, and I have to speak up as one of the as a unit owner for 30 years who is living this law. And I have to tell you, I'm having a hard time feeling sorry for insurance companies who are one of the highest performing sectors in the country. The reason people have insurance is so they won't be wiped out by an event. All of us have been in accidents or caused problems. We didn't mean to, but you didn't know your refrigerator was leaking, and you shouldn't be decimated and bankrupt by this. So my feeling is this, for a law that legislates how much financial risk an owner can take, it seems to me it should be between the insurance company and the owner, and that if the insurance company wants to say it's a $100,000 deductible, the owner has the right to say yes or no thank you and move on. The way it is now, this is kind of a final nail in the coffin because we have the reserve study bill, which perhaps is misinterpreted, but it has resulted in high monthly fees of up to 50% more, sky-high assessments of 20, 40,000 more, and now you're putting this on us. I admit I am confused a little because Delegate Holmes is saying, well, your deductible is what the insurance company will pay. But by definition, the deductible is what you pay. So maybe the problem is a lack of clarity in the bill or in my head, because when you say your deductible is $25,000, to me that means I've got to come up with $25,000. And for anybody it's hard, but for a retiree it's especially hard. And the reason, one last thing, people join condo communities is you give up some of your rights of a single family home so you can pool your resources and you're not responsible for everything. So I am opposed to the bill, but it may be that I'm confused about the whole term of deductible.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll have Jeannie Paulus. Okay. Jeannie, you can begin when you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jeannie Polhouse, and I am a condo owner in Baltimore City. Ever since the condo building in Florida collapsed, condo owners in the state of Maryland have been lambasted with one piece of legislation after another. The first one was the House Bill 107, which has been a disaster. It's not clearly stated. It has caused so many problems. We've had huge assessments. My condo fee went up $200 in 1 year per month. Now, this bill wants to increase our insurance deductible for damage to common areas, which rarely happens. Maybe in Prince George's County and Montgomery County, but not in the rest of the state, and certainly not in Baltimore City or Baltimore County. In addition to our incredible increase in water bills in Baltimore City, which have gone up 30%, well, 3 times, and our gas and electric bills, which have doubled, and they're going to go up another 30% by April, this bill could easily bankrupt our condo owners. If you're trying to do away with the condo ownership in Maryland, then you're being successful, because many of us are thinking of selling and moving on to other states. In Baltimore City, many condo owners are elderly, such as myself. I'm 82 years old. We bought a condo because it was a more economical way of home ownership as we got older, without all the maintenance, which we can no longer do. Now it is becoming unaffordable. This must stop. Condo owners are not in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Glad to see Baltimore City represented. Are there any questions for our virtual unfavorable witnesses? Well, seeing none, that ends the hearing on HB 449. We're going to move to the home show, HB 557, Residential Owners and Common Ownership Communities, Bill of Rights. Delegate, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. And again, I'm going to attempt to make this as brief as possible. Most of you know that I sometimes refer back to a task force that was conducted in 2005 with the final report of the task force that came out in 2006. We have not had an official task force since then. However, I was successful in creating a non-official task force back in 2021, which lasted about maybe a little bit over a year. During that unofficial task force, we discussed many of the things that were still not addressed in the 2026 final report task force. One of those items was a Bill of Rights. And I recognize that there is some discussion within the testimony about this Bill of Rights. And I assure all of you that the discussions that are taking place in this Bill of Rights would not be ignored, but will be addressed. One of them I do recall was from the AG's office, whom I do tremendously respect, that asked that their agency be removed from this from this legislation. That does make some sense to it in terms of where it goes. The other discussions that have been taking place with this Bill of Rights is relevant to some of the duplication that takes place within the current laws of the Condominium Act, the Condo Act, and the HOA Act. And I understand the discussion on the duplication, and I assure everyone that those discussions on the duplication of these events will be taken into consideration. And with that, Madam Chair, I would take questions.
Any questions for Delegate Holmes? Seeing none, and you don't have a panel, sir, correct?
No.
No, okay. We'll move to favorable with amendments. We have, I think, in person, Catherine Rathbun, as Columbia Association resident. Okay, no. How about Karen Strawn? There we go. Consumer Protection Division of the Office of Attorney General. You can start when you're ready.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I am Karen Strawn. I'm with the Maryland Office of the Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division. And we think this is a good bill. I believe a Bill of Rights is a good thing for people who live in common ownership communities. The only thing we have a problem with is the fact that it says that individuals in common ownership communities would have a right to have the Office of the Attorney General take action on their behalf in the event that we're not able to amicably resolve the situation with the consumer and the association. First of all, we don't represent individuals. We represent the citizens of Maryland. So this would be taking on additional duties that would require more people to be able to do this. More importantly, however, it doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because if we were to take this on, I don't know why, because of where you live should be the basis that we would take on individual citizens' complaints. It shouldn't be the basis of where you live. It should be other considerations if there was ever going to be something where we took on cases for individuals. In addition, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes consumers are wrong. There are a majority of people who feel one way, and the vote takes place, and the association goes forward with what the majority wants. And we get complaints from somebody who did not get what they wanted, and they then file a complaint, and we can't resolve it successfully. And then they would then have a right to have us take their action to court. This would be expensive for associations, for which everyone would need to share in the costs. And again, it is not something that we do. So for those reasons, we ask for favorable with amendment to remove the provisions that place responsibility on the Consumer Protection Division.
And we're going to go to our virtual favorable with amendment witness, Thomas Allen. Is Thomas here?
Yes, I'm here.
You can start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Thomas Allen, supporting amendment of HB 557, Bill of Rights for Homeowners. There are 4 new rights established in the bill. 1, using facilities at half the cost compared to non-residents. 2, secret ballots, neutral parties to administer elections and audit of elections. 3, in-person or remote access to meetings, whereas current law allows boards to pick virtual only, which is not good for seniors. And 4, properly trained and indemnified governing body and manager. In order to gather more support, I would recommend removing the training requirement for this year. You can have all the training in the world. That isn't going to stop the bad actors who will do whatever they want in spite of the training. The Community Associations Institute already has a costly training program, so there's a risk this will just be a cash grab for an organization that restructured in 1992 so that homeowners no longer have veto power over CAI policy. If there are delegates that oppose the right of homeowners to vote to approve any changes to governing documents or policies, which is, I'm sorry, there's 5 new rights, so that's the 5th one. Please review my written testimony. As a sneak preview, 11B 116C says, notwithstanding the provisions of a governing document, a homeowners association may amend the governing document. And the governing document is defined to include declaration, bylaws, deed, agreement, and recorded covenants and restrictions. So clever attorneys can get around the community input by calling a rule by another name, such as the policy.
Thank you so
or
much for
guideline.
your
Thank you.
testimony, Mr. Allen. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Allen? Thank you so much. Seeing none, we will move to two unfavorable witnesses. First one is Joel, is that Hurwitz? And Jean Hyatt.
Can you hear me okay? It's Joel Hurwitz. Am I on?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
You can begin.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Boyce, Howard County Delegates Strauss and Ziegler, other members of the committee, and Delegate Holmes. I especially appreciate your emails last week on HB 558 and happy to discuss this further as well. My name is Joel Hurwitz. I live in a condominium in Columbia. I'm a member of the Harper's Choice Community Association Board, speaking here only as an individual and subject to the Columbia Associate annual charge. As I testified in a previous session, I support better run common ownership associations. I have a long list of issues where procedures are not properly being followed, but this bill fails to achieve its objectives. Whereas Project 2025 is a blueprint for implementing chaos, this bill creates chaos without fast implementation. The bill reads more like the aspirations of the task force than is implementable legislation. The bill conflicts with the governing documents and other provisions of state law. The bill points out problems without specifying a path to implementation. For example, item 1 would be designated a member of the association for a lien. How does this work with the Columbia Association, which only has 10 members? We could have a long discussion about Columbia Association's unique governance structure. Item 4, using community facilities at half price. I find the math doesn't work for the Columbia Association to make it financially viable and to get one half the cost. I think the rates would be raised for the residents. Number 7, the right to vote by secret ballot, recall, and other items. My condo does not have secret ballots. We have a complicated percentage unit voting system. Who are the neutral parties? Even an attorney will work for the governing body. And the language says, unlike where you have financial matters, if the language it's included in the governing documents, what if the documents don't provide for recall? What are the procedures? Item 10, what if you don't get the timely reported documents? Item 14, how do members have the right to change in policies? And item 15, as you previously discussed, problems with the Attorney General, 11B 115.1 only applies to elections and not to other topics. So don't understand, you again, creating a right without any implementation procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to Jeannie Hyatt. Let's get you unmuted. There you go. Please go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As with so many of these bills, I am for them in theory, but the problem is in practice. They cause a lot of problems. I love the provision in here about elections. In our condo, the election is paper ballot, mail-in ballot. Anybody can, if someone isn't voting, can take a ballot, write in their name. We don't do any check on signature. They're counted in a back room by supposedly a neutral party, but also a colleague who works for the same employer as somebody on the board who's running. So if you can put something in there about elections that would make them fairer, I'm thinking e-ballots instead of paper ballot, or somehow more than one person neutral. But my feeling is right now, the concept of the bill is great, but it's not ready for prime time yet. And maybe pause, take a little more time to define terms, think something out. And my number one thing, before you pass anything that impacts a group, have people from that group, in this case, homeowners that will live the law that you create, have them on in your focus group. You do a fiscal note that talks about impact on government, but it doesn't look at impact on the people that live the bill. So that would be that's why I oppose it. I like it in theory, but I think it just needs a little more work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hyde. And thanks for pointing out where we have public hearings like this one, so we can make sure that those voices are heard and considered in the formation of the bills. Any further questions? Okay, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 557. We will stay with House Bill 558, Delegate Holmes, Common Ownership Communities, Local Commissions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. To begin with, I want to explain to you why this bill is in front of you. We have had discussions previously about CCOCs, Commissions for Common Ownership Communities. Currently, in the state of Maryland, there are 2 CCOCs. And for the past 5 or 6 years, I have continued to be asked by other jurisdictions to have a CCOC. Specifically, Baltimore County wants one. Charles County has been asking for a CCOC. Other jurisdictions throughout the state have been asking for the assembly of their own CCOC within their jurisdiction. What this bill is attempting to do is to set standards for the creation of a CCOC, Commission for Common Ownership Communities. Because what I think we do not want in the state of Maryland, I don't think we want to have 24 different types of CCOCs, all with different recommendations, different alternative disputes mechanisms, and with different types of membership and notification processes. This Bill 558 is an attempt to create a standard for any jurisdiction that wants to create a CCOC. This is not a mandate. This bill does not dictate that any jurisdiction has to create one. It sets the framework and the guidelines for what takes place if you decide in your jurisdiction to form a CCOC. The framework for this legislation was taken from one of the existing CCOCs. And as I have looked at some of the testimony, I think that some of the testimony, some of the testimonials, some of them have not really looked at how efficient or effective a couple of these existing CCOCs work. And I would encourage anyone who is looking to investigate them to look at how these CCOCs work. The CCOC in every jurisdiction that wants to have one will be able to have your common ownership communities and their citizens be able to address their concerns within their jurisdiction. That's what this does. And the detailed outline of the requirements, if they want one, is in the bill. And as I indicated at the very beginning, the framework for this legislation was taken from one of the existing CCOCs. And that existing CCOC, in my opinion, works very well, which is why I used that framework for this. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will take any questions.
Thank you. So just for my continuing education, if I was part of a common ownership community in Howard County or Baltimore, and I had concerns about a CCOC. Under your bill, I would then just go to my local government in Towson or in Howard to address those concerns because they would be setting up the CCOC.
That is correct.
Okay. Any other questions for our bill sponsor? Okay, we have virtual favorable testimony from Steve Horvath from HOA United.
Thanks again, Chair and members of the committee for hearing my testimony. Steve Horvath from HOA United will be really succinct. We recommend a favorable report on this bill, and I think as the Chair just elucidated, many different aspects of government have taken things down from the higher and higher levels down to lower levels. And if Montgomery and Prince George's counties are any example, those are programs that have established education and resources for owners and board members. They have established an alternative dispute resolution process. They have also established certain requirements that have to be fulfilled. And it seems that if the state is unwilling or unable to do this at a state level and pass the legislation to do it, certainly passing this bill would be a step in the direction of allowing other communities in Maryland to have a framework to follow the lead of Montgomery and Prince George's County. So we overwhelmingly recommend a favorable report on this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Okay, we will move. I think we have in person and unfavorable from Catherine Rathbun, Columbia Association. Are you here? Okay, we have a virtual unfavorable from Jeannie Hyatt. Let's get you unmuted. There you go.
Okay. Hello again. Thank you to Chairman Corman. It's late in the day, and the other members of the committee. I have to admit, I was opposed to this until I heard Delegate Holmes speak. He says it simply provides the framework. It doesn't mandate this. I'm usually against more regulation because, honest to goodness, this reserve study bill and now House Bill 449 is devastating us. But as long as it doesn't mandate it, and I love that it offers resources to owners for alternative dispute resolution. I love that part. So I'm changing my vote and saying I'm in favor of it.
The power of persuasion from Delegate Holmes. Any questions?
I admit it.
We appreciate it. All right. Seeing no further questions, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 558. We'll turn to House Bill 615, Delegate Holmes, Condominium and Homeowners Associations clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair. This is going to be the most complicated piece of legislation that you have ever seen in your entire time as a state delegate. And my testimony is going to take approximately 3.5 hours to explain it to you. In two sections, in one section of the condominium code and in another section of the HOA code, the words are transferred back from the other and they are misappropriated. A unit owner is not a homeowner, and a homeowner is not a unit owner. That's all this does.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, we have, I think, favorable amendment from Jeannie Hyatt, but we'll see if she's been altered by your statement. Ms. Hyatt?
My turn?
Your turn.
Okay. Well, he did it again. He convinced me. So I'm going to say I approve. But Delegate Holmes, since I have 1.5 minutes left, I have to say you didn't convince me on 449, the deductible. That I'm still opposed to. But this one, you were very persuasive, so I'm changing my vote to approve. I mean, yes.
Okay. Mr. Chair, a point of personal privilege, please. Ms. Hyatt and I, as you can tell, have frequent conversations throughout the past months, plural months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. We also have favorable amendment from Steve Horvath, HOA United, another person I suspect you communicate with quite frequently.
Thanks very much, Delegate and Chair and members of the committee. Just, you know, this is actually a very straightforward bill. There's not much going on here from Delegate Holmes. And we just wanted to take this brief moment to encourage the Maryland legislature and your body to maybe take the opportunity to put more rigor to what's required for budgets. And I've provided the written testimony. I will not read it to you, but there are other states that have done an arguably much better job, and the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, which is promulgated by the Uniform Law Commission, has specified what has to be provided to owners. And so that none of that is in this bill and none of that is in your current law, but we would encourage you to at least consider adding more rigor to what has to be provided when a budget comes forward. Would also like you just to consider this notion that you can sort of provide notice that the budget's been approved in a newsletter. Newsletters aren't a formal way to provide notice of anything with respect. They are a way to inform a community about general things that are going on. Certainly you can put important things in newsletters, but a budget is one of the most, it's really the fundamental glue, right? The money, that's why common ownership communities exist. If there was no money being shared, if there was no loss or potential profit to gain together as a community with your pocketbooks, there wouldn't be COCs. So we would just ask you to really consider how the form of what should be provided and how you should provide it when it comes to budgets to the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 615. Delegate Holmes, go get a cup of water. We're going to jump to Delegate Allen, House Bill 698, Local Government Development Impact Fees, Surcharges, and Excise Taxes Reporting. And if you have a panel or anything, feel free to bring them up.
All right, I'm actually a little disappointed, Mr. Chair. I thought it was going to be the last one again. I'd be the one standing between everybody and the end of the day, but that's all right. So, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, the professor's not here, but everybody else. I'm Delegate Nick Allen. I'm here to testify for my bill, House Bill 698. This is my third hearing before this committee, and just like the previous two, this is a simple bill, and most importantly, it does not have a fiscal note. So I'm 3 for 3 on good fiscal notes so far. HB 698 would require county governments to make a report every year by July 1st to the Governor and General Assembly on the amount and use of county development impact fees, surcharges, and excise taxes. This is simply a good government and transparency bill. As you can see by the list of co-sponsors, it's bipartisan and multi-county. I think it's safe to say that the co-sponsors, some of my friends from Baltimore County, probably have different opinions on impact fees and surcharges and excise taxes, but we all agree that we want to see a uniform level of transparency and reporting for how counties collect these fees, how much they're collecting, and how they spend this money once it's collected. I'll also add that I'm aware of MACO's proposed amendments, and I consider them to be friendly. And thank you all for your time. I urge a favorable report, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for the bill sponsor? Delegate Healy.
I wanted to ask you if you have, in your preparation for creating this bill, looked at the various kinds of county governments we have in the state and how this bill, or is this only for charter counties?
I believe it's for all counties.
Okay, so and you have looked into the various ways that it might be affecting different counties?
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean, all as far as I know, all counties have been authorized to impose these fees. So they might do it differently, but they have all been authorized to do so. It's just whether or not they choose to do so, and if they are, we just want to know how they're doing it and what they're doing with it.
And you don't see this as imposing on a charter? You know, there's a charter process. The government, the counties have charters, and they have a whole process for amending their charters. This doesn't actually amend their charters. This is something else.
No, it's just requiring that they provide a report to the General Assembly.
All right, thank you.
And I will mention, because I don't think he's here, but I spoke with Dom from MACO, and their amendments are simply specifying that the report does not have to break down fees by legislative district, which I think is reasonable, because I don't think any county kind of tracks that. So I just wanted to point that that's what MACO's proposed amendments are, and I'm fine with that.
Great, and just for everyone's benefit, MACO is favorable with amendments. So any other questions? Okay, we have a couple of in-person favorable witnesses, Lisa May with Maryland Realtors and Lori Graff with Maryland Building Industry Association.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Lori Graff, CEO of Maryland Building Industry Association. I'm very excited to be here in favor of something today. So it's very well documented that we have a housing shortage. This bill does not change impact fees. It doesn't make them higher or lower or any of that type of thing. And it doesn't require counties to do more than they already are doing. It's just it's a reporting requirement. We've had some issues in certain jurisdictions getting some information at various points. So we're just looking for some transparency. We're looking to see how much money the counties are collecting. We know we have a housing shortage. More data we have on what's going into construction. We just talked a little bit before about the process of development. Any of the information we can get, the better for trying to tackle all of the different policies we need to look at as far as housing shortage and our housing crisis. So with that, we would ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Lisa May with Maryland Realtors, and echo everything that Ms. Graff just said. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you both very much. We have favorable virtual testimony from Nathaniel Foreman with O'Malley, Miles, Nyland, and Gilmore. If Nathaniel Foreman is available, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nathaniel Foreman, and I'm a land use attorney in Prince George's County. I'm here to testify in favor of House Bill 698. 698 would just require greater transparency into the development impact fee process. Right now, many counties, and I can speak personally about Prince George's County, require what has been basically classified as an excise tax for new development, and that goes towards public safety facilities or school surcharge facilities. Basically, this is just a way to make sure that the payments that are made by developers are tracked and posted. Because right now, while let's say the school facility surcharge in Prince George's County is almost $20,000 per dwelling unit outside the Beltway, there is no requirement that it go into any sort of fund for schools. Because it's classified as an excise tax, it gets to go into the general fund. This would just make sure that there's a way to demonstrate how much money developers are paying towards schools and public facilities to ensure that they are paying their fair share and it's being tracked appropriately. And with that, I would just look to cease my testimony and say thank you very much, and I hope that this bill will be approved or moved favorably.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I do not see any. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 698. We'll turn to Delegate Morgan, House Bill 490, St. Mary's County Competitive Bidding Threshold.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, rest of all you guys on this great committee. I am here to introduce today House Bill 490, Competitive Building Threshold for St. Mary's County. There will be an amendment to the bill to get my name off of it and basically put it in St. Mary's County. House Bill 490 is the bill that will increase minimum contract value. St. Mary's County can bid for competitive bidding process to $50,000 in order to ensure flexibility to adopt future procurement policies which are cost-effective and timely. The change updates policies to be in line with modern county practices, and I expect a favorable report on House Bill 490. And what the basic impetus behind the bill is that for many of our IT purchases, site licenses and things like that, the current bill is $15,000. The site licenses have to be renewed every year, every 2 years. It's going to go to one company regardless. So instead of going through the competitive process, we feel we can increase it to $50,000 and save everybody a lot of time and money.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 490. We'll roll right into 491. Delegate Morgan, St. Mary's County Metropolitan Commission, discontinuance of service.
Thank you, guys, again. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Vice Chairman, illustrious members of this committee. This is House Bill 491. Again, it'll have an amendment to it to take our name off it and make it a county bill. House Bill 491 allows the St. Mary's County Metropolitan Commission to discontinue all or in part of water or sewer service provided to an improved private property which has been determined to be unsafe for human occupancy due to an accident or natural disaster. It also requires a suspension for the ready-to-serve charge on some private properties and gives the Commission administrative and judicial enforcement for violations and regulations. The St. Mary's County delegation requests a favorable report on HB 491. And I do have a virtual witness, I hope, because it's snowing pretty hard in St. Mary's right now.
Any questions for the sponsor before we go to the virtual witness? Okay, we do have Christopher Beaver from the St. Mary's County Metropolitan Commission. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Beaver, and I serve as the General Counsel for St. Mary's County Metropolitan Commission. It's a pleasure to appear for you before you today. As many of the members may be aware, the St. Mary's County Metropolitan Commission is the organization responsible for operating and maintaining all of the public water and sewer facilities throughout St. Mary's County and has done so since 1957. My testimony today is in support of House Bill 491, which seeks common sense amendments to two sections of Chapter 113 of the St. Mary's County Code, namely 113.13 and 113.21. The amendments to 113.13 will allow the Commission to temporarily turn off water or sewer services to a property when it has been badly damaged to the point where no one can live in that property. Additionally, the amendments will allow the Commission to suspend charges for those properties so that customers don't continue to get charged when the property becomes unuseful due to the damage. The amendments to Section 113.21 subsection C will allow the Commission to use its administrative enforcement for water services in addition to the public sewer services which are already provided for. This will make the subsection consistent with the balance of Chapter 113, which addresses both water and sewer, as the current system operates on two distinct systems, water and sewer. The current language of the subsection is a little bit confusing. The amendment to subsection G of 113.21 will allow the Commission to recoup for reimbursement full amounts it spends in repairing damage its facilities incur by a third party and not be capped at $1,000. As you can imagine, any type of damage to these infrastructures are very expensive. So a $1,000 cap is not enough. And thank you for the time today, and I'll take any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill here on House Bill 491. Before we turn to House Bill 673, I think we have some subcommittee announcements. Vice Chair Boyce, keep in mind we have another bill to hear. Can you turn on Vice Chair Boyce's mic?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Natural Resources will meet immediately at the end of hearings today. Just run to your offices and jump on the computers. We will wait for you to join.
Delegate Lewis? Chair Lewis, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Land Use Subcommittee will meet 5 minutes after Natural Resources ends. We had to reschedule so that we didn't overlap with Natural Resources. We have a council in common. So watch your text messages and emails for that meeting. You'll have the calendar appointment with the Zoom link and the agenda as well. Thanks.
Chair Stein.
The Environment Subcommittee will meet tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Okay, we will call up House Bill 673, Delegate Terrassa, Condominiums and Homeowners Associations, Governing Documents, Electric Vehicle Recharging Equipment. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Boyce, and esteemed colleagues, for the record, I'm Delegate Jen Terrassa, bringing back another electric vehicle charging bill. Today, I'm presenting House Bill 673, which relates to the installation of EV charging equipment in communities with homeowners associations or condo associations. This bill is essentially the same as House Bill 1010 last year, but with just a few minor changes to address two concerns that were raised. This committee has previously enacted laws that address the challenges that individuals have in these common ownership communities when trying to install electric charging equipment. Currently, thanks to two bills sponsored by our very own Chair Corman, now provides that governing bodies of HOAs and condos must approve a unit owner's request to install electric vehicle charging in the unit owner's own assigned space. The bill before you today addresses a related but different issue of whether the governing body can install EV equipment on common use parking spaces in a common ownership community. Although placing charging equipment in communal spaces is an ideal way, as we know, to give charging access to many people as possible, some HOA and condo boards have been advised that they can't take a communal space and install EV equipment. They've been advised by their management company that they cannot designate a space for EV equipment because of the governing documents, and that in order to do so, they have to get 100% of the unit owners and mortgagees, which is obviously a virtually impossible task. I'm not sure I agree with that assessment. However, I have now heard from others that this is what HOA and condo boards are being advised. So to address this, House Bill 673 makes sure nothing in the governing documents prohibits this. This is accomplished by making void or unenforceable any specific provision in the governing docs that prohibit or unreasonably restrict the governing body from installing or authorizing the installation of EV equipment. So what changed this year really quickly, I added a provision that states that such installations are subject to the standard budgetary process. And the second thing we did is add a provision that requires the governing body to consider the availability of sufficient parking to meet the needs of the community. So we know this. We had a joint hearing earlier this year, and we know that charging equipment across the state is especially challenging at home, and where 80% of the charging is done. We know this is even more particularly challenging townhouse communities, and so I urge a favorable report.
Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Terrassa on the bill? Okay, Andy Fraser was signed up to testify in person. I don't see him here, but I think we have Steve Horvath from HOA United, favorable amendment virtually.
Thanks very much, Chair, members of the committee. Steve Horvath again from HOA United. I know everyone's eager to get to that next meeting, so I'll try to be brief. We think this is a great bill, and certainly communities should have the ability to install these stations. What you didn't get to hear earlier relative to HB 581, and you do have that written testimony, is that what might be the unintended consequence of this is that you're essentially promoting the ability for associations to impose capital improvement costs and build those into their budgets. And while there is some reasonable notion that a board of directors should be able to propose certain limited amounts of capital improvement expenses to the owners and budget for them, and that's a great portion of the bill talking about budgeting. If the board decides that they want to spend $100,000 electrifying however many number of spaces, that might not make sense if the budget is $500,000 or $1 million. The board has just imposed a 10 to 20% capital improvement cost into the budget. And so we would recommend, not just for this bill, but in general, thinking about ways to cap the ability for the board without the vote of the owners to impose capital improvement costs on the association and allow the owners to vote above certain thresholds. And that's really our only feedback. Otherwise, we think it's a great bill and would ask for a favorable with amendment. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing. Thank you. As a reminder, we have natural resources starting right after this. Land use will begin after that. Everyone stay safe in the snow if it's out there, and I will see you all later. Thank you. We're adjourned.